Holy crap.
People persist in doubting the evidence.
Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
We're turning all of our antennas towards Jimmy Church on Dark Matter Radio.
And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
All right. Bring it down. What's up? What's up? What's up? Everybody here? Everybody ready? Yeah. All right. Feels like a month, doesn't it? One extra day off. I feel like I deprived everybody and myself of a good time. Hitting that Starbucks Panama Reserve. I was so instructed by Charles to go and check out today. And I did. How you doing, everybody? Everybody in the house, welcome to everybody listening all across this great country of ours, all around the world. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. Today is Monday, October 13th, 283 days into the new year. We are live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in sunny Burbank, California. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your oh-so-humble host, Jimmy Church. Been gone. Flew across the country, came back. We are here. Boots on the ground. Boots on the ground. I do want to say to my family back in Ohio, thank you for a great time. You welcomed us with open arms, as you should. Had a great time. The wedding went off without a hitch. No brides tripped over dresses. Nothing happened. We have no spectacular video. Nothing got posted to YouTube. The reception, everything was great. And my brother is now happily married and in Hawaii on his honeymoon. Congratulations, David and Brittany. You're going to have a wonderful life together. And she's great. And she is now part of the family. And all of her, fresh in-laws that are now part of the clan. There you go. I misused Twitter over the weekend. It's supposed to be some company account, I was told. But I was posting personal pictures. You know what? I had fun. We had a great time. We made it, and it's funny how we flew out right after the show on Wednesday, literally right after the show, did the red eye, and get to Ohio, drive from Columbus to Cincinnati where the wedding was, literally no sleep, check into the hotel, turn around, go for the rehearsal. Immediately after that, rehearsal dinner. And so by that point, we hadn't slept in, 36 hours. We were cross-eyed and saying stupid things. But we got it all done, got to bed, got up the next day. Everything went off without a hitch. And then after the wedding, we turn around, and what do? We just fly straight back and do the whole thing over again. Fly at 4:30 in the morning. But we're back. It's good. And I feel like, after disconnecting from the show for 2 or 3 days, it literally seems like a month. But we're back. How is everybody doing? Did you miss me? Huh? I hope so. All right. Yeah, Twitter's already lighting up. Yeah, check that out. Dig it. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Seriously, it was cool. On my birthday, too. And the toast that I did for my brother was, and to Brittany, seriously, was, that's one of the best, if not the best, birthday gift I have ever gotten. And that's pretty cool. So, on my birthday. And my mom did make me a cake, okay? So, it wasn't all bad. I got a cake. All right. Big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around the world fighting the good fight for us. Big salute. Defending that right to the Constitution. Watching Homeland. We got to get on AFN. Watching Homeland. We got caught up. We missed the season premiere, but we watched it last night, back to back, 3 episodes. And yeah, it's an eye opener, isn't it? And just think about what I say. All right. Podcast, subscribe. Everything's been updated. We took care of that before we left. YouTube is way, way behind. We're trying to get caught up on that too. But that's the reason to go subscribe to the podcast, I guess, right? Makes sense to me. Man, YouTube just takes forever. Love the podcast. 20 seconds, episodes uploaded, updated, done. It's just a breeze. YouTube is one show is it's like no BS, like an 8-hour production just to get that up on YouTube. Oh, so much work. I don't know how much longer we're going to hang on to it, to be honest with you. Okay. All right. No, that's not, I'm not shooting a shot across the bow, but man, it's just so much work. I wish there was an easier way to get it done. Anybody got any tips? Let us know. Today, let's get this cracking. I'm ready. I'm fired up. You guys ready? Okay, 10-second delay. I say, you guys are ready. I got to wait. Got to wait for Twitter. Got to wait that 10-second delay. And then, bam. Are you guys ready? Today, Sacha Baron Cohen, 43 years old. That's right. He makes the cut. Of course he makes the cut. He's one of the best rappers out there. Isn't that what he does? What else? Oh, can't forget about Ricky Bobby. Marie Osmond today is 55 years old. Does she make the cut? Of course she makes the cut. She got all of us through our childhood, all of us men today. Go back and look at Marie Osmond when she was a kid. She looks good now, doing all those Weight Watchers commercials. Chris Carter today of the X-Files is 57 years old. Of course, he makes the cut. He's a believer. And our dead guy birthday today is comedian Lenny Bruce. Born in 1925, died in 1966 at the age of 40. Hilarious guy. Hilarious. Everything that he's, well, I don't know about everything, but all of his comedy, all of his funny back then, he got arrested for. It's crazy because today's comedians on any channel would just think about how they would have been arrested back in 1960. And that's all he did was get arrested. But died at the age of 40. And this is a crazy little piece of trivia about Lenny Bruce. The death scene photos of Lenny Bruce in his home, the negatives and the pictures were purchased by, dig this. Are you ready? You sitting down? Phil Spector. Yes, that Phil Spector, in jail for murder. Phil Spector, record producer, Ronnie Spector. He purchased the negatives and the photographs to keep them from the press. He was found, Lenny Bruce was found, needle in his arm, burnt spoons, burnt bottle caps, naked on the floor. Right there, Hollywood on Hollywood Boulevard, his house. And the official cause of death was acute morphine poisoning caused by an accidental overdose. But the death scene photographs were never published. Isn't that interesting? Bill Spector stepped in and purchased those. All right. I thought that was interesting. When we talk about, one of the things, it's kind of related to Sandy Hook. Hey, man, there's no death scene photographs. Well, you know what? Not all death scene photographs are published. Think about that. All right. Where are we at? Oh, okay, the big one. The big one. Yeah, he kept them for his personal collection. Feels way creepy. That's from Jonas. He even got arrested. Evil Rick Sinnott says on Twitter, he even got arrested for implied material. That is true. Love Lenny Bruce. Okay, anyway, check it out. I saved the best for last. And since we've been doing Van Halen trivia lately, it seems like the subject of the show. Sammy Hagar, happy birthday today. He is 67 years old. Stallone just said, yeah, who's on tonight? Bruce Maccabee's on tonight. The Bruce Maccabee is on the show tonight. I was getting ready to get to that. But back to Sammy. Sammy's 67 years old. Of course, it was part of our trivia last week. But this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do for Twitter tonight. We're going to light it up. The biggest, you get this question all the time. I hear it. I hear it in public. It's like once a day I hear this question get asked to somebody else that I don't even know. I'll eavesdrop on a conversation, and you'll hear it, which is, which one do you prefer, man? Van Halen with Roth or Van Halen with Hagar, man? Van Hagar. Which one do you? What was the better band? Well, I'm going to throw that out to you. What was the better band? David Lee Roth, Sammy Hagar. I want to know. Both answers are the correct ones, or so you think. We all know what my favorite Van Halen album is. And that's Van Halen 2. Van Halen 2. All right, so I want to know. Okay, it's already clicking by. Roth or Hagar? Van Hagar. Wow. It's kind of tough because both were good. Both were different. See, Stephen G just came in with Sammy. It's not always Sammy. I mean, it's not always David. Wow. Wow. Look at this. Wow. Are you telling me that Hagar is going to outvote Roth? Wow, look at this. I wish in the podcast or on YouTube or anybody that's not following us on Twitter right now could watch what is clicking by. Wow. Wow. I'm shocked. Nancy Nurse says, Dave Amy. I'm blown away. Wow. Roth got outvoted. Roth got outvoted about 10-1 so far. Out of what, 50 tweets? And I'm sure it's going to keep coming. I'm blown away with that. I would have not guessed. Sammy brought new life to the lineup. Wow. Wow. I gotta get Hagar on the show. That's it. I'll do it for you guys. All right, let's move on. Oh man, I got so much to do here. That's what I get. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You want to hashtag DMRadioNet. Come hang out in the sandbox. It's being lit up right now. Sandbox is hashtag DMRadioNet. Follow us at letter J, Church, like Sunday, Radio, at JChurchRadio. Come hang out. Van Hagar, the talent level versus Roth. Sammy wins by miles, and the albums after Roth were the best of Van Halen. That's from Joe Martinez. Wow. Ken Lipson comes in with Gary Sharon. All right, let's bust it out. Let's get to this first break, and then I've got a bunch of email I got to go through before we get to Bruce at the bottom of the hour. Tomorrow night, Butch Winkowski. And Wednesday, Josh Reeves. Again, this week is an all-request Fade or Not week. Think about that. And if you requested these guests, you know who you are. I don't play around. This is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. We are back. Today is Monday. Bottom of the hour, Bruce Maccabee. I am so excited about that. You have no idea. I've been wanting to talk to him for a long time. Shoot me an email to Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. This is bespoke radio for the masses. Only on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us, everybody.
You're listening to Jimmy Church Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, you have tuned into the latest phenomenon in late night talk radio, Fade to Black, starring the inimitable Jimmy Church, showcasing his continuing quest in pursuit of knowledge of the strange and paranormal. Sit back, open your mind, and let's get cracking.
What's up, revolutionaries? It's me, Jimmy Church. Do you have an IRS or state tax issue? Well, I did, and I called national tax experts. My problems were fixed, done, fini, and man, I got to tell you, it was a relief. National Tax Experts are a recognized tax office that services clients in all 50 states. Doesn't matter where you live. Give them a call. I'm telling you, they take the time to understand each and every client's individual financial status as well as their financial goals. And that's exactly what you need, my brother, when you're taking on the evil three-letter. So, seriously, give them a call today at 1-877-909-5444. Again, 1-877-909-5444. Or go check out their website, www.nattaxexperts.com. That's NATTAXEXPERTS.com. Tell them Jimmy sent you.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
You know, the thing is, this is Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, only on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Shoot me an email to Jimmy@JimmyChurchRadio.com. Get to that in a second. See, the thing is Roth, Van Halen, that was a circus. That was a party. It was entertainment. Not to be taken too serious. Well, except for Edward. And when he left, the circus left. Eat 'em and Smile, that was a good record. That was a real good record. You can see where the party went. After that, Sammy comes in and they got all serious. I suppose the songwriting might have gotten a little better, but it's two phases of the band. One was a party band. The other one was, serious. Two different things. It's what do you prefer? Me, I prefer the party. Pate. Email from Brad. He says, the reason for this email is I know you just had on Graham Bonnet on the show, but I was wondering if you guys had any plans for him to be back on. I asked this because my sister-in-law is a big fan of all of his work, and she became sick on Saturday. Yesterday, early morning, she called. She was in great pain, unable to drive herself to the ER. I ran over, picked her up, and we headed to the hospital. Sherry has jammed out to Rainbow and all of his stuff. She would flip out if he was on, and she had a chance to call in. Brad, I will see what I can do. All right? Give my best to Sherry. Great email. Graham will come on anytime. So, we'll bring him on. We'll get an update, and we'll have Sherry call in. How's that? That's what you call bespoke radio. But you know what? It's an excuse for me to talk to Graham. Dude is Amazing. Check this out. Email from Chris in Winnipeg, which is in Canada. Love our Canadian. Oh, man. Get email every single day from Canada. Canada, Australia, the UK, Scotland, and Netherlands. Every single day. 50 emails. They match what we get here from the States. What does that tell you? Love Canada. He says, my wife and I, this is long, so just stay with me. My wife and I were on our way back from Thanksgiving dinner at her parents' house Sunday evening, October 12th, 2014. I guess that's Thanksgiving in Canada. Okay. I guess. At approximately 8:10 when I noticed a man aiming his cell phone at the night sky while waiting at a bus stop. We both looked up and saw two amber glowing orbs about 35 degrees, 40 degrees in the sky in the southeast. They were completely stationary and remained in the same spot until we got to our street about a minute later. Stopped the vehicle in the middle of our street to watch these orbs. They didn't move or dart about. They simply faded away to nothing. Once they faded away, I continued the drive home, which was only seconds more to our house. As I pulled in the driveway, my wife said, "Happy birthday to you." Yes, October 12th is my birthday. Oh, that's kind of cool. Libra. I pulled into the garage, and I said to my wife I was going to go back outside to see if they were there again. I went to the end of our driveway and saw that one of the orbs was back in the same relative spot in the sky. It remained stationary. I stayed outside in hopes that it or they would come back. Approximately 5 minutes later, these two orbs returned, coming from the south, traveling to the north in an apparent perfectly straight line. I lost sight of the orbs as it was behind the trees and a house, but the other one stopped in a spot in the sky where I could maintain visual contact with it, about east-southeast, where it stayed for about 3 to 5 minutes. My wife came outside to throw some recycling in the cart, and I motioned to her to come back and take a look. She remained with me for about 2 minutes until the orb simply faded away. I waited for about 10 minutes or more to see if anything would return, but nothing happened, so I went back in the house. So happy birthday indeed. The first thing I thought was, I got to email Jimmy Church. I attempted to make a video, but there was too much ambient light from the street lights in the houses. The orbs were very vibrant to the naked eye, but too dim for the iPhone, unfortunately. So I ask everybody up in Winnipeg, Canada, October 12th, which is yesterday, day before. Did you see anything? Let us know. And if you did, and hopefully you've got some pictures, send them to us. We would like to know. This email from Ed Reardon, our friend, our remote viewing friend, sent me this. And I want you guys to check this out. He says, Jimmy, I hope all is well. I recently finished a small remote viewing project that you may find interesting. I worked this solo with 3 sessions, resulting in 3 videos that are now available for public display. The target turned out to be a series of strange-looking caves in Antarctica. I always found the hollow earth topic to be bunk, but after this project was done and I got my feedback and began researching the topic, the information that came through in those sessions started to become more interesting. I'm a novice on the topic, so I'm still trying to figure this out, but it's become rather clear to me that there is something strange happening in Antarctica. Now, you can go and look up Ed on YouTube. It's Ed Reardon, Riordan, Ed Reardon, and go look at his remote viewing videos. Dude is incredible. Also, on his YouTube page, you can go back and look at the remote viewing that he did of the Malibu base. Incredible. I just got this email a few minutes ago, so I haven't looked at the Antarctica stuff, but I will soon be checking that out. There was a series of articles that were all over the place the last couple of days about some NASA photographs over Antarctica showing that strange hole with the cloud formations. Pretty interesting, and kind of a weird timing on things too as well. But anyway, that's beside the point. Go check out Ed's videos and let me know what you think on that too as well. I will watch them immediately after the show tonight. All right. I want to say thank you to Debbie. Debbie sent me a birthday care package full of stuff that if I told you guys what was in there, just let me say this, tasty cake. And other stuff too as well. Just should be completely illegal. You need to be of drinking age to receive stuff like that. Amazing. Thank you, Deb. Very cool. That was the box came huge. I'm like, what's in here? What could this possibly be? It's heavy. I opened that thing up. Oh my goodness. And yeah, talk about a woman after my own heart right there. A fan after my own heart right there. Hit it on all points. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, she just said you're welcome. It was very cool. All right. You know, Debbie, I can't tell everybody what was in that box. First off, they're going to be jealous. But the list is long, and it's it was perfect. The Frank Sinatra crumb cake. All right, I'm giving it away. Too much, too soon. I got an email. I think this came in from Eugene, or it was a post. An article on the Washington Post about asset seizures that fuel police spending. And go check it out on the Washington Post. Read the article today. And after Ferguson, I'm curious as to why. I don't mind SWAT teams. I mean, we need stuff like that. We do. You just never know. But what do we need? Seriously, what do we need armored personnel carriers for inside the United States? What do we need that for? We had here in the Valley, in North Hollywood, the famous Bank of America bank robbery. You've seen the videos with the two guys with the automatic weapons, and the LAPD was unprepared. They had their handguns. They were outgunned. And so instances like that, I get that. I do. But an armored personnel carrier? No. An AR-15 in the trunk of a car? Makes sense. There's a car wash down the street from my house, and I would always, the police would wash their cars there. And I would go up and talk to them all the time. I go, dude, what's in the trunk? And they're always proud. Yeah, check it out, man. And so after the bank shooting here, I bought a car once. I bought a BMW from a family that lived behind the bank shooting, right there. I mean, right on the corner. And I was like, dude, you guys are right here for the. He goes, man, our whole house got shot up. And I was like, really? Yeah, Bank of America paid, and he walked me around the house and showed me, the bullet hole. I mean, riddled. When the car went up the side street that was right in front of his house, that whole shootout went up. And I can't imagine living in a home like that and then having, I don't know how many shots, thousands of rounds are going off right there. So, yeah, that's an instance where we need that kind of stuff. But you go and you read this article on the Washington Post and you just question everything. What do you need that stuff for? What do you really need it for? You don't need an armored personnel carrier with a turret on the top. You don't. End of story. Faders.org. Go check it out. Faders.org is it's pretty cool. And yes, it's a fan page. But the complexity of the site, if you can hear my voice right now, faders.org, and you enjoy the show, go check that out. You have the ability to put together your own blog. It's a community make friends, hang out. Very artistic crowd too as well, knowledgeable, but very cool. It's a very, very cool setup that they've got going on over there. So do go check out faders.org. Let's see what else really quick, because I want to get to Bruce. Oh, North Korea's Kim Jong-un is back. Sort of. They say he's back and took pictures. I can't wait for tomorrow. I want to see his limp. With that, let's get to Bruce Maccabee. This is Fade to Black, only on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Bruce Maccabee. That's right. Tomorrow night, Bruce Winkowski. Wednesday, Josh Reeves. Oh, yeah. In the house. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
Are you afraid of the dark? Don't move. Don't touch that mouse. You are listening to Fade to Black, bespoke radio for the masses, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Dark Matter.
Dark Matter, Dark Matter, Dark Matter, Dark Matter.
You're listening to Fade to Black
on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
Oh, yeah. You know what that music means. You know what time it is. When I asked last month on the show, when I asked Stanton Friedman, who was the guy? Who was the one guy that you look up to? And he said, Jimmy, that's an easy thing. Easy answer. I said, well, who? He said, Bruce Maccabee. He's the guy. Bruce Maccabee, after high school, he studied physics at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. Got a BS in physics. And then at the American University in Washington, D.C., an MS and a Ph.D. in physics. In 1972, he joined the Naval Surface Warfare Center. He has worked with various aspects of the Strategic Defense Initiative and the Ballistic Missile Defense System. He has been active in UFO research since the 1960s when he joined the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, otherwise known as NICAP, until 1980. He became a member of MUFON in 1975 and was subsequently appointed to the position of State Director for Maryland. And in 1979, he was instrumental in establishing the Fund for UFO Research. Dr. Maccabee is the author or co-author of about 36 technical articles and more than 100 UFO articles over the last 25 years, more like 35 years, including many of which appeared in the MUFON Journal and MUFON Symposium proceedings. He wrote the last chapter of the Gulf Breeze sightings by Edward and Francis Walters. He is a co-author with Edward Walters of UFOs Are Real, Here's the Proof. He is the author of his current book, The UFO FBI Connection, and he is the author of the novel Abduction in My Life. He is listed in the Who's Who in Technology Today and American Men and Women of Science. I would like to welcome to the program Stanton Friedman's own Dr. Bruce Maccabee. Bruce, are you with us tonight, sir? How are you? Dr. Maccabee? Bruce, we can hear you in the background. I think
I'm having some trouble with my phone here.
Oh, okay.
Hang on a second.
Okay. We got you loud and clear over here. As we're waiting. You got to love live radio, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello?
We got you, Bruce.
Okay.
We got you loud and clear.
Good.
Did you hear? You may not have heard. You were having some phone issues. But during the introduction, I had I said that, last month we had Stanton Friedman back on the show. And I asked Stanton, I said, Stanton, in all of your years of research, you're the godfather. You're the guy that we all look up to. But who is the guy that you look up to? And he was right to the point, Bruce Maccabee. How do you that is rarefied air. How do you feel about that coming from Stanton? Ooh, I think we have some problems. Wow. We have some problems. We have lost Bruce Maccabee. All right, I'm going to reset. I don't know where he's at. Let's check this out. I'll be back right after this. This is Fade to Black. I'm going to reset these phone lines. You got to love live radio. I'll be back right after this. Stay with us, everybody. Do not touch that mouse.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? My name's Brian Taylor, Ninja Badass Extraordinaire, and this is JimmyChurchRadio.com.
JJZR in your face.
JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
All right, we're back. Bring it down. We're back. We have Bruce with us. Dr. Maccabee, are you with us, sir?
I am with you.
Okay. Yeah, you sound, just so you know, we could hear everything before.
May the force be with both of us.
All right. Welcome to the program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I had said in the introduction that last month when I had Stan Friedman on the show, and we all regard him as the guy. He's the godfather for us all. And I said, now, when, in your 40 years, 50 years of research, we all look up to you, but who's the guy that you look up to? And he said, that's easy. Bruce Maccabee. And I have to throw that out there. I don't know if you've ever heard this before from him, but how does that make you feel? That's rarefied air.
Well, it makes me feel nice. And I would put him at the top of the field myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And what with a guy like Stanton, with his intelligence and the way that he looks at things, and analytical. I think he's got some emotion to him too, if you get to it. But for him, to pick out everybody in the field, it was you, and that's just if he would. I would freak out if he said that about me. I mean, I don't know if I would use the word nice, but I just thought I'd throw that out there at you. And so how are you doing? Before we get started, as you know, this is just an open-ended conversation. Where we start is where we start, and where we end is where we end. I'll try to take you outside of the box a little bit, but it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation, and as friends, and if you and I find it interesting, everybody else is going to find it interesting. And I'm looking over at Twitter right now, and everybody is just saying, welcome to the show. They're fired up. So here we go. You ready?
I am ready.
All right. Let's start here. Let's start with kind of the basics before we get into history, so to speak. But and your opinion matters, not only to me, but to the audience too. When you look, there's two eras of photography. We have the modern era, obviously, digital cameras. We have, the older style film, negatives, Polaroids, analog, if you will. So we have two eras. But when you look at a photograph, do you look at photographs with the same set of eyes today with digital, or that you do with an older analog photograph? What is it that you look for first? And do you look at something different with modern photography as opposed to film photography?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say, regardless of the type of photography or videography or whatever, you have to look at the whole case. Just looking at the pictures usually doesn't tell you very much. I mean, you may be able to say you can see a shape there or something, but to be able to prove that it's a real object out there and not some sort of a hoax or a misidentification accident, whatever, requires the whole story. I was just this evening investigating a case where a lady saw something out in the middle of the night and videotaped it and went next door, tell our neighbor about it, and he saw it too. But I was first presented with the video and photos that she took, and all I could say from them was there were some lights up in the sky. You have to know the rest of the story to find out if those lights are really anomalous. Well, then if you're confronted with what happens nowadays with digital cameras as opposed to the old days, a lot of it is, of course, still the same. You look to see if things are in focus or out of focus, if there's brightness variations that seem to be unreasonable considering the lighting of if you got shadows from the sun on the wrong side of an object or something like that. So it doesn't matter whether it's an analog, old-fashioned type of photo or digital. With the modern digital photos, you also have the probability, of course, the problem that it's very easy for somebody to drop a UFO app into the picture. And that makes it rely even more upon what is called the circumstantial evidence. I was once told by a lawyer that in a court case that involves physical evidence and a story, of course, and very often the case is not made based on the physical evidence, because no matter what you say about the physical evidence, the other side can come up with an expert who will say the opposite.
Right.
To make or break the case depends upon the circumstantial evidence that you have to have perfectly clear.
Is there a way to tell? I know that there's, some heavy force involved at some level, but is there? Do you have the ability to look at a digital photograph and see if that artifact was indeed put in later, and for the lack of a better word, photoshopped in?
I guess that depends on how well it's photoshopped in. You've got to have the edges of the applied image be just the right sort of focus or defocus, fuzziness, whatever you want to call it, to make it look real. An amateur faker will have typically a very sharp edge to the image, whereas there ought to be a softer edge, especially if the story is that the object was traveling along and you've got a photograph of it and there's no evidence of blurring due to motion.
Right.
You better have an explanation for why there's no blur.
Right. With when you look back throughout history, there are so many. Well, for me, there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 strong, really, 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 really strong cases. Not only with cases that you've investigated and researched, but others. Which ones do you think are the best evidence?
The first case that I tackled was the McMinnville photos of 1950 by Paul Trent, and they had been. I started working on them in 1973. They had been around for 23 years already by that time.
Right.
And the initial investigators they weren't UFO investigators. The initial investigations were made by the newspaper photographer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And all the way from then onwards, the photos were basically endorsed even by Dr. William Hartman, who did the analysis for the Condon study in 1968-69. He, too, thought that, as far as he was concerned, an extraordinary object had flown within the sight of two witnesses in order to summarize what he said.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time analyzing his photos. When I took on the task of trying to resolve the issues he raised about the photography, I expected to be able to explain the pictures. And then I found out that some skeptics, Philip Glass and Robert Schaefer, had already criticized the pictures and come up with one explanation for a physical effect that Hartman had noticed about the brightness of the bottom of the object.
And what was that? What?
Well, if the object had been close to the camera and there was no what is called veiling glare, which is light scattered sideways in the lenses and onto the film, if there were no veiling glare in the camera lens, then the bottom of the object ought to be very black, and as it gets farther and farther away, going towards the horizon, the bottom of the object would get brighter and brighter. So Hartman had noticed that the bottom of the object, the brightness of the bottom of the object was greater than the brightness of a shadow underneath a nearby tank, and he thought that the extra brightness of the object could be a result of distance, and if it were, he could estimate the distance based on the amount of brightening. So he did that and concluded that the object could have been a kilometer or more away. And then Schaefer brought up the idea of veiling glare. This is the image of the object is surrounded by the image of the sky, and the sky is bright, the bottom of the object is dark. Light scattered sideways within the lenses and within the camera could make the image of the bottom brighter than it ought to be, and essentially fake a distance in the way the calculation would work out. And so I became aware of all that stuff, and then I realized there was one more correction factor that hadn't been taken into account. Bottom line is, by the time I got finished with all my analysis, I came up with a result that Hartman had. But then doing all this research made me realize that really the truth or untruth of the case really didn't rely on the photos, because you could always argue that the Trents were somehow very clever and managed to fake a picture one way or another.
Right.
Of course, everybody who had the copies of the negative, the print, looked for a string up above the object, and nobody's ever found any convincing evidence of a suspension. This object is seen below a couple of wires that are up at the top of the picture. Had it been a fake picture, it would have been too bad for the Trents that they show those wires. But anyway, I did what you might call historical analysis of the photos themselves. Quite apart from the technical details of the photos, the big question was, were the Trents the type of people who would be likely to pull off a UFO hoax? I concluded they wouldn't be likely to pull off any hoax at all, say nothing of a UFO hoax. And this is based on testimony of the Trents to me and to James McDonald, and a number of other people, all listed in the on my website on a case called the McMinnville Photos, a large paper which covers a period of research time all the way from 1974 up through the year 2000.
Your website, by the way, the links for it are at jimmychurchradio.com. Just click on Dr. Bruce Maccabee right there and go. But and check it out, because one of the things that I really appreciate about your website is everything is there. All of your white papers, if you will, Everything is there. Word doc. Click on it, and everything. It is a monster of a website for ufologists and researchers that are out there, and that you want any reference. Well, not every case is up there, but certainly everything that you've worked on, and you can then appreciate the type of analysis and research that is done on your behalf. The website is just absolutely extraordinary.
There's over 100 megabytes worth of.
Yes. There's a lot of stuff there. I spent a lot of time there this week, and I've spent time over on the site over the years. But it is just it's a library of knowledge. It's extraordinary. A lot of work.
My most recent in-depth investigation was of the videos taken in Chile in November 2010, which were widely publicized as being the first multiple videos of unidentified flying objects. And Leslie Kane had written about it in the Huffington Post. And the Chilean investigators had thought that there was something really going on. And to my great disappointment, I showed that these things were probably insects.
Oh, is that what you...
I had been told that there were as many as 7 videos of the same object, and I thought, well, if there's at least 2 of the same thing, we could do a triangulation. If you can do a triangulation, you can determine the distance of the object, and then from the image size, you can determine the actual size. Unfortunately, the videos were not synchronized. The objects were not the same objects, and they could have been small objects close to the camera. It would just happen to be buzzing by. So.
And what did you think? I remember, speaking of South America, the FLIR videos that were done. I think it was the Mexican Air Force.
Yeah, that's right. That's another case that's on my. That was in 2004, and I published my results in the summer of 2004, and again in December 2004. And what you see on the website is a monster analysis of that. That was another situation. That was, let's say, 2/3 of a disappointment. 2/3 because the amount of effort onto the second 2/3 of the case, or second part of the case, was 2/3 of my total effort, I might say. That particular case began when the Mexican Air Force was flying over the Yucatan Peninsula in just a normal surveillance flight. And all of a sudden on radar they detected an object that suddenly appeared in front of them. Not exactly in front, but they turned their plane and headed towards it. And they were picking up on radar some object that started off being like 7 or 8 miles ahead of them, and then as they caught up with it, it sped up to the point so that they were doing 230 or something miles an hour, and this object was staying 2 miles ahead of them. Now, it's important to notice that at 2 miles you can see an airplane. Any airplane of other than a model airplane would be visible at 2 miles.
Sure.
And furthermore, you're looking at this thing from the rear. Your FLIR system picks up heat. It should have been able to pick up the exhaust of the engines. So both the eyeballs and the FLIR system should have picked up whatever was there.
Right.
Whatever was there stayed in front of them for about 10 minutes, and then they had to turn to the right. And they were heading northwest to begin with. They had to turn to the right and head east to go back to the base because they were running out of fuel. This thing they continued to track on radar was 2 miles ahead of them when they started the turn. By the time they finished the turn, it was 5 or 10 miles ahead, and they tracked it out to about 30 miles, and it actually sped up. It was going 300 or 400 miles an hour when they last detected it, which is kind of a strange, I think. Their initial impression was that they had picked up a drug runner or somebody doing an illegal operation flying up out of a clandestine airfield.
Which is what they were up there supposedly doing.
Yeah, right. That's the surveillance was to stop
drug running
by airplane.
Right.
And they thought they had an airplane in front of them. They couldn't understand why they couldn't see anything. And the funny thing is, if it had been an airplane, a drug runner that could outrun the airplane, why in the world didn't it spit up to its high speed first when the plane was behind it and get away from the airplane instead of allowing the Mexican Air Force plane to stay only 2 miles away? Anyway, this thing is what I call a radar UFO, a radar-only detection. Unfortunately, this radar UFO has been missed by everybody because after they turned to the right, they started picking up lights on their infrared. I call them lights because they were electromagnetic radiation, but you couldn't see it visibly. It was heat signatures that they were picking up. And they picked up a number of lights that seemed to be traveling some distance to their left and traveling along with them. And as I analyzed those lights, I concluded that they could have been about 110 miles away and stationary, as opposed to being like 12 miles away and traveling along almost at the speed of the aircraft.
Well,
it became very, very long, detailed analysis, but I ended up concluding, along with some other people, that what they actually saw were flares burning off gases from an oil field that was direct. It was no doubt in the direction they were looking at. It was a kind of nice investigation analysis to do because the FLIR system recorded all the required data, the speed of the aircraft, the actual location of the aircraft at any time, the direction that the FLIR was pointing, the azimuth and elevation of the FLIR pointing direction. All these data were available, and you also had a tape recording of the events recorded by the people.
In that event, are you saying that the FLIR showed airspeed? Because when I look at those videos, the first time, and I believe you were in this documentary too as well, but the first time that I saw that footage, it looked immediately I thought that stuff was on the ground. That's my visual sense said to me that it was smokestacks, or it looked like it was something on the ground. That's what it looked like. The plane was flying by, the clouds were moving faster than what was going on the ground, and the way the camera moved with it, it looked to me like it was just stationary stuff on the ground. We've all flown in airplanes and looked out the window and looked at stuff at the ground relative to the speed of the plane going by, and that's what it reminded me of immediately. Did it hit you that way too as well?
Yeah, let me make it. I don't recall actually whether the airspeed was given or not, but we knew what the airspeed was. We knew where the plane was at every instant because they gave the location. But yeah, right. If there's something that's close to you, and you like a telephone pole at the side of the road, and when you first see it, it's to head into your left maybe, and it's on the left side of the road, let's say, and your angle of view changes drastically as this thing moves past you. But if you were looking at a distant radio tower that was many miles away, and you're traveling along a road, the direction to the radio tower many miles away will change very, very slowly, especially slowly compared to things that are nearby.
Right.
Well, that's the effect that you had here. It looked as if these objects were going past the clouds, on the other side of the clouds, but past the clouds, right along with the aircraft.
Right.
But what, in fact, was happening was when I used the azimuth directions of the FLIR over the time that they were traveling and seeing these lights, the azimuth direction of the FLIR continued to rotate backwards. They were looking out the left-hand side of the aircraft. The FLIR was looking out the left-hand side. And the azimuth, the direction to these lights, was continually dropping backwards at a slow rate. As the clouds seemed to move by, the nearby clouds were moving by at a much greater rate. It gave you that strange sensation that these objects were
moving,
chasing you, but
right.
they weren't.
They weren't. Yeah, that's the way it felt to me. And do you ever go with your gut? Like, if you go back to McMinnville, when I look at those photographs, it's my natural instinct when I look at those photographs is that is a real object at a distance, and it's not hoax. That's my gut when I look at the other pictures you can look at, and and go off your gut and go, okay, come on, okay, you're going to have to convince me on this. But do you ever go off of your gut, like with McMinnville or the Mexican FLIR
what you
stuff?
mean by your gut?
Your instinct, your sixth sense.
If I had just the pictures themselves and nothing else to go by, which occasionally happens, I'd be likely to say, well, they're probably faked. And a good fake, for example, they hung it from a string. They hung some sort of a model from a string, from the wires using a string, and they were very clever and made the string match the sky background. If the string color matched the sky background color, you couldn't see it.
Right.
You got to have some contrast there.
Right.
So the point is, you can always think of some way, and in fact, I did think of ways to fake. If they had used a paper model, for example, that was cut just right, they could have synthesized the effect of the brighter than expected bottom of the object, of the image, I should say.
Right.
So that's when I learned that a photo a UFO does not make. You got to have a whole bunch of other stuff along with it. It's all got to be consistent. And the Trents were totally consistent in their stories. The skeptics point out to some slight variations that appear in the newspaper, the early newspaper stories, but the early newspaper stories weren't written until a month afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the Trents could have forgotten some of the fine details, and then, of course, we all know that newspaper stories newsmen don't report exactly 100% of correctly of what they hear. Now you would ask, what pictures do I find interesting? The McMinnville case, of course, is there. Skylab 3, the astronauts, they photographed some red object up in was near the Earth. I hesitate to say in orbit because we don't really know whether it was orbiting or just traveling by at the time or whatever. But they had 4 pictures of this red thing. The 4th picture shows a structure as it's hard to describe. If you can imagine a jackstone, it might be something like it.
Right.
But the point is that all the astronauts saw this thing out there. They thought it was a big red satellite. Well, guess what, guys? There are no big red satellites. There are no red satellites at all. There aren't even any satellites up there with red lights. The satellites are typically metallic colored or white or black. And so that's an interesting one written up on my website. The New Zealand case is the one that really proved to me that there was really something weird going on. That was December 31st, 1978. And I got the opportunity, and this is written up in the book, because this particular case is what connected me up with the CIA. The New Zealand case happened on December 31st of 1978. And about a week later, I had the film in my hands. Now, this case involved multiple witnesses on board a freighter aircraft, ground radar, airplane radar, color movie film, and a tape recording made at the Air Route Traffic Control Center, the radar control center at Wellington, and another tape recording made by a newspaper man who happened to be on board the flight.
And there was 2 separate incidents. They went back out and reshot, too. So you kind of...
Well, there had been sightings in December 20th and 21st, the night of December 2021 in New Zealand, sightings involving these freighter aircraft that flew in the middle of the night. And that had attracted some interest by some people in Melbourne, Australia. One guy in particular, Leonard Lee, thought it would be neat to do a story on those sightings. So he called up a guy who was a New Zealand native but had moved to Australia and worked at the same TV station. He called up this guy, Quentin Fogarty, and said, why don't you get yourself a new taping crew, videotape crew, or film crew, and do a short documentary on those previous sightings. So Fogarty hired a cameraman and a sound record person, and got permission to be on board the airplane as it flew the same flight. It's actually 10 days later. That is a flight from Wellington, from Wellington to Christchurch and back to its home base in Blenheim, New Zealand. And of course, Fogarty didn't expect anything to happen. He was down in the belly of the aircraft with all the newspapers and stuff, filming his first stand-up, saying we're flying along the same route and that we'll keep our eyes open. He was about ready to start his second stand-up, which ostensibly was at the end of the flight. He said, we have now landed in Christchurch, and we didn't see anything on the way south, but wait till I tell you about the radar sightings that happened 2 weeks ago. In other words, he had a teaser already written that he was going to do. He never got a chance to do it. It was the air crew, the pilot and co-pilot, had spotted strange lights going on and off near a place called Kaikoura on the east coast of the South Island. And the captain got out of his seat and went to a stairway hole in the floor that led down to the belly of the aircraft, and he yelled down, "You better get up here real fast." And so that was the beginning of a long series of sightings, some of which were quite clearly radar visual. That is, the radar detects something in the same place. You see a light. It gets very complicated, but that's the only case that has been argued out in the refereed press. I took one part of that case, calculated the brightness of the object using all sorts of photographic analysis, the sensitivity of the film, the type of lenses of the movie camera, and so on, and calculated that this thing, one of the objects that they saw was so bright it was equivalent to a couple 100,000 watts worth of incandescent light bulbs going off. And it moved with respect to the aircraft. So it certainly was something out there. The skeptics ended up claiming that it was a squid boat, but if it was a squid boat, it had to be fishing at an altitude of about 3,000 feet.
Yeah, I remember that film, and I watched it quite a bit. There was something that was definitely shot, and there was radar return on that as well. I just got a question in from one of our listeners, and he says, please ask Dr. Maccabee to clearly explain the areas of disagreement that you had with Mr. Callahan regarding the Japan Airlines Flight 1628 incident.
Well, I'm glad he brought this up because it allows me to talk about the third part of my new book, the FBI CIA UFO connection.
Yeah, we're going to go backwards. We'll try to stay in the right, but yeah, let's talk about the 1628 incident. Most people will say that is one of the most, documented sightings, witness pilots, and everything else that we have out there. And I didn't know that you had a disagreement with Callahan.
Well, I don't disagree with Callahan. He was a bit behind the times, but of course the case didn't really attract a tremendous amount of attention until he went public. But first of all, let me say that happened in November of 1986, and nobody would have heard about it if it hadn't been for the fact that the Japanese crew talked to their friends, and the word ultimately got to Japanese news people that this airplane had interactions with a UFO that had been detected on radar, and it was because of what they believed to be radar detections that this case was investigated by the FAA. Well, by this time, I had known a guy at the CIA for a number of years, and he told me that about the sighting, and that I should read the newspapers and see what information there was there to see whether or not there had been a real UFO sighting or if this was all a big misidentification. The skeptics were right off the bat saying it was a big misidentification. So,
right, with an object that was, a couple of miles wide. Yeah.
I guess the disagreement with Callahan had to do with the meeting that I had with him. He claims that there was a meeting. Well, let me drop back a little bit. The FAA said we're going to investigate because it was radar detections. And they started their investigation in January of 1987. I began investigating too. I first heard about the sighting from this guy in the CIA. And I told him, I'm afraid that the FAA is going to disparage this sighting, going to claim that it had nothing to do with radar. They're not going to do a very good job because but they're not UFO investigators. I said, and I told them boldly, I could do a better job than the FAA. But my big problem was I didn't have any of the data.
And what real quick, Dr. Maccabee, if you don't mind, for the audience out there, what was Callahan's position at that time with the FAA?
Well, he was the head of the Accidents and Investigations organization. I forget the exact title.
Right. But he was
in charge of this investigation.
Right. He was an executive he was a manager in the FAA.
Right. Well, like I said, I wanted to work on this case, but I didn't have the data, so the CIA guy arranged for me to meet with Callahan. I have pencil notes on a meeting with Callahan on the 5th of February, and I think it was just me and a CIA guy and a couple other people. Callahan's recollection is that there was a big meeting with 3 of the president's science people and 3 from the CIA and 3 from here and there, maybe a dozen people, which is maybe such a meeting happened, but I wasn't there. I of course have to go by my own notes as to what happened. Well, the thing is, when we went to the CIA guy and I went to the headquarters to talk to Callahan and get some information, and that was fine. We did that, and we watched his video combination of the radar detections and the voice transmissions going on at the same time. I told the CIA guy that the FAA was going to say that there was nothing there. This is a prediction I made based on my watching the video. That did show anomalous targets appearing occasionally, but there wasn't a continuous track of anomalous targets. So I concluded that the FAA was going to say there was nothing to it. Turned out that I was right, and on March 5th or 6th of that year, 1987, the FAA announced that they had analyzed the case and found there was no radar support for the claim that there was UFOs around the airplane. They did not pay any attention to the visual testimony. And, now at the meeting that I had after the meeting I had with Callahan, the CIA guy gave me a box of data, radar, printouts, testimony, translations of the Japanese, the testimony of the Japanese guys, like the air crew, and the radar people, and so on. In other words, I suddenly had the goods with which to fight back against the skeptics, which I did. And I wrote a paper that took up the whole of the International UFO Reporter Journal of the Center for UFO Studies in the May, June, or June, July issue, I forget, of 1987. And it was the most detailed analysis of the sighting that was ever carried out. Some people have approached the detail in recent years, but the point is that I showed that the visual sightings were definitely not explainable, and there might have been a radar target that was involved. But the main thing was that the visual sightings were unexplainable.
Did the radar, can you tell the size of an object on the radar data that was supplied from the FAA on the JAL incident? Or does it just show the object?
It just shows that there is a dot there. There's no way of knowing how physically big the thing is.
Okay.
It had to have what's called a radar cross-section that was some size, hundreds of feet maybe. The radar cross-section of a mirror is different from the radar cross-section of a ball. It's at the same size. So it depends on the shape of the structure as to what you get as an echo. The radar signature you see is an echo of the radar pulse. Well, I published my results, but the news media had been interested in the subject in March of 1987 when the FAA announced their results, and after that the news media forgot about the whole thing. And so the fact that I had shown that there were UFOs seen by the air crew, that sort of fell through the cracks as far as the general public was concerned and the general media. It wasn't until and so the case went to bed, you might say, went to sleep in late 1987. It wasn't resurrected again until Callahan retired about 10 years later, the latter 90s, and he got involved with the Disclosure Project of Greer.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he was talking about what he recalled and showing his video and so on. I actually met him and interviewed him in the late 90s. I forget the date. I think I wrote it in my book. This is all outlined in the book, including a summary of the case itself. But if you want to get the fine details on the case itself, you can go to the website again. I couldn't collapse the whole website article into the book. It would have been a book by itself.
And the links to the latest book and everything, they're right there at on Bruce's website on the first page. Just click there. It'll take you over to Richard Dolan Press, actually, and that's who is publishing the new book.
Right.
Now,
Richard said to me, he says, I love this book.
Well, there's a reason why he does, because, and you and I were talking about this briefly earlier today, which is, Richard's a black and white guy, and so are you. It's all about the data. And that's right. Exactly, for Richard, I bet you he's got that in his bathroom. He probably reads it every day. It's his kind of book, and it's my kind of book, too. I'm a black and white guy. And when I watch documentaries, not only on ufology, but it could be about anything. It could be about flowers. But I just want data. You know what I mean? I just want data. I want information. I just want it to come at me in all directions. And that's what I appreciate. And that's why I appreciate you. There are other photo analysis type guys out there that I can't even listen to. I can't. I can't. I just can't. I can't do it. You're a whole nother breed, and that's why we respect you so much. So anyway, the links are right there at jimmychurchradio.com. You can just click over and go. I got another question here on Twitter, and I want to ask you this because you and I talked about this earlier. What do you think before the program today? Do you have a preference to credibility with Polaroid versus film? Is it?
Well, I suppose this is with respect to the Gulf Breeze pictures.
Well, no. When I read that, I always think of Ann Druffel. so there. But you know what?
You're thinking of Heflin?
Yeah, Rex Heflin. Well, that's not stated here, but I always think of when I think of Polaroid, I do think of Rex Heflin. First, but you're absolutely right. Gulf Breeze, which is another subject, which I would love to get into if we have the time. But what do you have a preference? Polaroid versus film?
The old-fashioned Polaroids, the ones that were popular up until up through the 70s, was the type where you had to load in two rolls of stuff. One of the prints and one's the developer.
Right.
And then you had this paper tab you pulled out. You take a picture, you click the shutter, you pull the paper tab out, the developer part gets squished up against the film, the negative part. The negative becomes a positive, and you, let me see, is that right? No, I think the negative gets transferred onto the positive, and then after 60 seconds, you open the back of the camera and pull a picture out. I had one of these cameras. That was the way the Polaroids worked until the middle 80s. They came up with a type Model 600 that ejected the film instantaneously after you pushed the button. Now, as far as faking is concerned, nobody has ever raised, that I'm aware of, has ever raised a question of double exposure in terms of the Halen pictures. But that question was raised about the early pictures of Ed Walters.
Because those are two different cameras, the Polaroids, but two different processes that take place in order to eject the print and also install the film. You had the single cartridge on Ed's.
Well, yeah, but you still had the situation where the point about faking is the double exposure, which requires that you click the shutter twice before you pull a film out. The mechanism is a little bit different in his camera than it was in the Halen case. The Halen camera was an older version than Ed's old camera. Ed took a bunch of pictures with his old camera, where you could click the shutter any number of times before you pull the tab out and start developing. Then he took some pictures with a Model 600, which is virtually impossible to fake because the film gets ejected immediately after you push the button. As I said, the subject of faking by double exposure did not come up with the Halen pictures. They were claims by skeptics made of other ways of creating these images. I personally don't think that Halen photos are a fake anyway.
Right. No, I still think...
Ed, it was a question of, did you do a double exposure fake? And the classic way of doing it would be you go into a dark room where you've got a model, maybe 10 feet away from you. This model is well lit by flashlights or something, but you've got to make sure that the surroundings are black, so you've got black paper or black cloth or whatever behind the model. And you take a picture of the model. Now you put the model, you have to know where the model is being framed in the picture, typically near the top or the middle of the picture. Then you go outside, let's say, and you pick a background scene. You click the shutter once when you're in the dark room with the model. Now you've got what's called a latent image on the film. It's not a real image yet. It requires the developer to turn it into a real image. But it's there in a latent form. You then go outside, and if you try to remember where is the model. If you're clever enough, you make sure that there may be some trees and buildings and whatever around, but the model does not overlay the trees and the buildings. The model's up in the sky somewhere. You take a second, you click the shutter for a second time, and now the light from the surrounding scene comes and hits the model, hits the film, and then you pull a tab on the Polaroid camera and start the developing. And when you get the developed picture, you've got a summation of the model with this background. And this is what I call a simple double exposure. In the area of the image of the model, there is light from the model plus light from the background scene. So you can tell if there was a double exposure, because if you made a model which had, let's say, black squares for windows, the black squares wouldn't make much of an image would not make a bright image.
Right.
When you do the first exposure. When you do the second exposure, the skylight would act like it was coming right through the windows, and the black windows, upon developing, the black windows would have the same color and brightness as the sky.
Right.
Well, it's a several-hour discussion to try to go through the Gulf Breeze stuff. I did mention it in my book because it's one of the cases that I talked about at the CIA, of all places. The Gulf Breeze sightings began with a bunch of people having sightings before Ed even was involved, and that's what I put into the book, the initial sightings by other witnesses.
Were they seeing I've done a bunch of research into Gulf Breeze, and it in a lot of ways it leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. But let me ask you a couple of questions, because you were there. You knew Ed Walters. I'm sure you. I think I've even you've used and seen his camera. You set up so many different things. You were triangulating. You were measuring. You thoroughly investigated this case for a long time. You covered it for a long time. But take me back for a second. Take us all back. Were the witnesses seeing the same thing that he was photographing? That's important to know here.
That's what they said. There were a dozen people, I think, who said they saw exactly the same thing, and a bunch more people who saw lights in the sky or partial view, what might be called partial views of it. And that ranged from November 11th, 1987, with this whole thing began at 2:30 in the morning with a lady, Billy Zammett, whose dog wanted to go out. She thought it wanted to go out for the typical reason, and instead of when it got outside, it looked up, started barking. She looked up and saw what she said was this object with a blue beam coming down onto her dog.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she suddenly got the feeling they've come to take my dog. She picked up her dog and ran back into the house.
Right.
Before she went to bed that night, she thought, well, I'll tell somebody in the morning. And the next day, she decided against it. She wouldn't have said anything if it hadn't been for the fact that pictures taken by Ed at 6 o'clock p.m. that day, they were published in the local paper 2 weeks later.
I'll never forget, back in 1987, it was one of the first color photographs I had seen published in a newspaper, right on the cover. And I'm looking at that, and I thought to myself, finally, here we go. This is an excellent picture. Now we have something to investigate. This looks real. And it took the country by storm. I mean, not to even play this lightly, Gulf Breeze grabbed the country by its bootstraps for a long time, and those photographs were extraordinary. And what was your reaction when you saw those first couple of Ed Walters pictures that went around in the media? What was your first gut?
Well, the first pictures that I saw were small versions, black and white copies. And by that time, there had been a number of pictures, and my first thought was this is another Billy Meier type of situation. Which
meaning what?
Which means there's too many pictures with not enough valid backup for them.
Yeah.
In other words, I expected this to be a hoax.
Okay.
What happened was he took these pictures. There were a bunch of sightings on November 11th, 1987, which I've written about in the book. And then he had sightings and so on afterwards that were not reported in the paper. But other people started reporting their stuff in the paper. And it wasn't until early January, that the local MUFON investigators found out who Ed was and interviewed him at extent. And they then called up, or somebody got Bud Hopkins, who was in the prime of his UFO investigation and abduction investigation stuff. He went and talked to Ed and Ed's wife and the kids and so on, and became convinced that from the personality point of view, he didn't know about the photography, but from the personality point of view, he didn't think that this could be a hoax. But he called me up and said, "You've got to go down there. I can't make any comments about the photography, so you've got to go down there and investigate it." And I made an application to the Fund for UFO Research for travel money, and they sent me down to on the 19th of February of 1988 to begin my investigation. And I was, at that point, flabbergasted to find out just how many pictures there were. Up to that point, I thought there were 5 pictures. And then by the time I got there, I think there was like 20.
Right.
Anyway, while I was there, I carried out a I tested his camera and carried out a double exposure fake right in front of him, as it were. And he didn't seem to understand what I was doing. He gave me no evidence of any photographic capability other than clicking the shutter.
What was your reaction to Ed when you very, very, very first met him? Did he seem credible?
one thing about him was he by this time he was sort of treating this as a not as a lark, but as he had a sort of a humorous output. When I got there, they had given him a 4-lens camera to take pictures with. It would have been a stereo camera and would have allowed us to calculate the distance to the model, and then how big it was from the size of the image. In other words, we had given him a bomb, but he had been told that this camera has 4 lenses on it, so it will create 4 pictures. When each time you click the shutter, it creates 4 pictures. That way we can send these pictures to as many as 4 different photo analysts to get opinions of them. He was not told about the stereoscopic aspect of the camera.
Yeah, I want everybody to understand what Dr. Maccabee just said. They removed the element of Polaroid. They took that out, and they gave Ed Walters another camera, a special camera, sealed camera that he couldn't mess with, and then sent him out to take some more pictures of the UFOs.
He was given this camera and said, "I'll take some pictures." Now, up to that point where he was given the camera, he made this comment. Up to the point where he was given the camera, he was guilty by photography. There was too many pictures for him to have that he had taken. Therefore, it must be a hoax. Then he was given the camera in early February, and there was a 20-some day stretch when he didn't have any sightings at all. And then he said, "Now I'm guilty by non-photography." In other words, the fact that he hadn't had a sighting to take a picture made him guilty for not photographing anything. But ultimately, he did get a picture with this 4-lens camera of an object that was about 70 feet away, I estimated, from the calibration of the camera, and 2 feet in length. It was a small object that went by on the other side of some trees, and he took 10 photos with his camera.
Now, didn't he say that it was, much larger? You calculated the object to be 2 feet.
He thought it was big and far away, and his wife, Frances, thought it was small and nearby. This depends on where you stand to look at this object. She was in one location, and he was closer to it than she was. But the thing is, you got to understand that I was getting to know Ed pretty well and tracking him, and he had a bevy of MUFON investigators following his every move. When he shifted from the old Polaroid to the Model 600, and right off the bat got a photograph with the Model 600, the game, that was a sort of a game changer. And then when he took pictures with a Nimzo camera, I said, "Why don't you it would be neat if you could make a bigger stereo camera." And I suggested that he get another Model 600, put 2 Model 600s on a board, a horizontal board, a foot apart, set it on a tripod, and push the buttons on these cameras at the same time. When you see a UFO out there, take a picture with each camera, click the shutters at the same time, and then we can make a distance measurement. And Ed was all excited. He did not try to avoid the stereo aspect, which any hoaxer would, because the stereo aspect, with a 1-foot separation, would have been able to tell immediately if the object was a model within 10 feet, or something that was a couple hundred feet away. Well, Ed did me one better, and he got 2 cameras and he put them on 2-foot separation. With a 2-foot separation, you could get a stereo effect out to a couple hundred feet, and he started taking pictures of that. And his last picture that he took on May 1 of 1988 had 2 different types of UFOs, the Nimzo type, which was different from the one that most people remember in his old Polaroid pictures. He had the older Ed type and the Nimzo type, and they were at different distances and different sizes, all in the same picture, along with lights that allowed me to calibrate. It's a long story, but the point is that at this point, I said, there's no way that this is a fake. You can't read a book to find out how to fake stereo photos. I had to figure it out for myself. I found out that there was a way to do it, but you'd have to be a genius to be able to pull off one photo that had two different size objects, sizes that were comparable to what had already been estimated on his two different types of UFOs. So by that time, I was convinced that it was a real sighting. It was also interesting to note that in April of 1986, while Ed was having a dry spell, that's in April of 1988, when Ed was having a dry spell, there was a couple of dozen other witnesses who were reporting stuff. They had a flap in April of 88. And the last sighting of real importance was by the county coroner and his wife. In July, they had planned to have a party based on UFOs. Every year they had this big summertime party, and they were going to have a UFO costume party. Sent out invitations. I had a copy of it. I was given a copy of their invitation. That was on the 10th, was the date of their planned party. On the 8th of July, Fenner McConnell, the county coroner, got up for his morning run about 6 o'clock in the morning, goes outside, sees this object hovering over the water of the Pensacola Bay, calls his wife, she comes out and sees it too. While they're both watching, the thing moves away from them. He testified that it was exactly the same thing that was in Ed's pictures. And to use her phraseology, it was the same thing that was in Ed's pictures, and that wasn't a fake. That was no model, she said.
And where are you today with Ed Walters and Gulf Breeze?
Well, I'm still hanging in there. He had a number of sightings over the following 10 years. Gulf Breeze was an anomaly starting in November of 87 and lasting for about 5 years. The so-called Red Bubba sightings started in November of 1990, I think it was. And they had consistent sightings of something moving through the sky for a couple of years. Some sightings involved Ed, some sightings did not involve Ed.
Right.
He had some of his own sightings, and he had pictures in the book, UFOs Are Real, Here's the Proof. You'll see some pictures taken, like a UFO and two jet airplanes, the UFO with a water spout, a video of a UFO coming into the field of view and going back out. It created a shadow on the trees on the north side of the Santa Rosa Sound while Ed was videotaping it from the south side of the Santa Rosa Sound. An awful lot of stuff, and there were a couple of sightings that happened after what's in the book.
This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. We're talking with Dr. Bruce Maccabee. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Bespoke Radio for the masses. Let's switch over to the book. I mean, the thing is with Ed, we'll leave it on this. There was the one report that kind of came out and disappeared about, I think he sold his house, and the person that bought the house went in and found the model like in the attic above the garage or something. Was that disinfo, do you think, to shoot down Ed Walters, or was this, or was it the same object that was in his Polaroids?
There were a number of incidents, including photographs that were taken to disparage Ed's claims. If Ed had been the only person seeing this thing and taking pictures, everybody would be highly skeptical of it, including me.
Mm-hmm.
But I did an article, actually a paper written for the 1990, I think, MUFON Symposium entitled Gulf Breeze Without Ed. And basically what I did was I said, okay, let's leave Ed out of it, talk about all the other people who saw stuff. And that was hundreds.
Right.
So,
Did anybody else besides Ed take pictures?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was this. Unfortunately, they're anonymous pictures. In December of 1987, one guy claimed that he got pictures of 3 objects taken with a Type 110 Kodak camera, which is a small camera.
Instamatic, yeah.
And another supposed lady sent in to the newspaper some pictures that had been taken a year or so before, which clearly showed the same thing. And then there were some other pictures in later years. It wasn't until the Bubba sightings, though, that things became sightings were so consistent that groups of people were out looking and got videos and photos and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, I had my own sighting there September 1991 of a ring of lights that appeared up in the sky. And there aren't supposed to be rings of light up in the sky.
Wait. I have not heard this before.
Yeah.
You've had your own sighting. Okay, before you tell us about that, I was going to ask you, have you had your own sighting? So before you tell us about this sighting, which I think is extraordinary, I haven't heard this story. Have you ever had any other sightings before Gulf Breeze?
I saw some black spot go over Baltimore, Maryland in 1980. I call it a black spot. Unfortunately didn't have binoculars with me. The best resolution of my eye was I could see a millimeter, 1 millimeter spacing of lines at a meter away. I tested myself to find out.
I'm sure you did.
This was a black thing, completely black, against a clear blue sky. The sun was setting in the west. Behind me, I was looking towards the first that appeared in the southeast and was going northward. I was standing on the western shore of the Baltimore Harbor, for anybody who's been there. The famous aquarium of Baltimore was in front of me, 1,000 or 1,200 or 1,500 feet away, I guess. I was right near the Constellation. Is it the ship?
Constitution.
Constitution.
Yeah, one of the two, right?
Yeah. We were there with a crowd of people, and I noticed this black thing. I first thought it was a bird, and then I realized it wasn't flapping its wings. If anything, it looked like there was a wave rolling around the outside edge of it. It was weird. I wrote about it. My sighting was published in IUR and the UFO Journal. That was something. I don't know what the hell it was.
How fast was it moving? I'm asking the great Dr. Maccabee. You must have had all of this data already, just like calculating. How fast was it moving? Do you have any idea?
It wasn't moving very fast.
No wings, though. So, what kind of?
I was sure that had it been a bird, I would have been able to see the wings flapping.
Right. Okay.
Well, that was, as I said, in 1980. But the thing that happened in 1991. Now you have several different segments to the Gulf Breeze story. The first part of this Gulf Breeze story goes from November '87 through July of '88. That was Ed's most prolific photographic period, and involved probably 200 other witnesses during that period of time. I forget the exact number, but I've got it written down in my book, Gulf Breeze Without Ed. Then the sighting rate slacked off for about a year, and then in November of 1991. They started seeing, actually in April of 1991, was their first, I think, red Bubba sighting. They didn't call it that at the time. In November of 1991, they started seeing red lights traveling through the sky, which would suddenly flash white brightly and then disappear. And this became such a consistent phenomenon that they were having sightings sometimes every day of the week. Generally, though, it was one red light thing. Occasionally, there would be more than one. This was a time period when the spring of 1992, I should say, the spring of 1991, I think was when, I can't remember now. Let me jump ahead. They were having these red light things moving through the sky many nights out of the week. And that was interesting, but there wasn't much I could do about it because it was a long distance away. Then in September of 1991, early September, they started to see rings of light appear. And they were I should point out that there was a group of people who went out just about every night, except in February and March. They went out virtually every night to see what was there. And they had trained themselves by this time to be very level-headed and not panic and all that. Take careful photographs and videos of what was going on and document as much as they could.
Right.
And they started seeing rings of light appear up in the sky. I said, this bears further examination. So I traveled down to Gulf Breeze, got there on a Friday night. They told me it was too late. They had a sighting the night before. Nothing happened that Friday night, but I got a chance to interview some of the witnesses. Then Saturday night, now I should say when I went there, I took a big ear microphone. That's a dish microphone. It's designed to pick up whispers at 100 feet or something. And the reason I took that was this thing was reportedly moving through the sky. And the only hoax explanation that was remotely reasonable was there was some sort of a firework, like a flare or some red fireworks that were on a motor-driven, like an airplane of some sort, or a balloon suspension. They had these things had moved through the sky at considerable speed, sometimes against the wind. So there had to be some motive power, and I assumed with a big ear microphone, I could hear an engine running if there were an engine.
Like a gas engine or a jet engine?
A gasoline, like a little model airplane engine.
Okay, gotcha.
Because that's what I envisioned. If I was going to try to make up something that would do this, it would have to have something like a balloon, either a fixed wing model airplane or a balloon, but the balloon would have to have
a tether.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, I was there with everybody's had this necklace on, the necklace being your binoculars. We're all standing around looking up in the sky. If people would be there in pairs, one person is looking at the other person, but the other person is looking up in the sky, and then they change. So this way you cover the sky 100% of the time.
Right.
All of a sudden some little woman yelled, "There it is." And I just looked up. She didn't say left, right, up, down. She just said, "There it is." I looked up into the sky, and sure enough, there was a dot up there. Now, I should point out that we were at the south end of the Bob Sykes Bridge that connects Pensacola with Gulf Breeze. And there were a playing field with big lights on in Gulf Breeze, maybe a mile away from us. These lights were lighting the atmosphere. The atmosphere was a bit hazy. It wasn't rain or anything like that, but you couldn't see the stars with your naked eye. You could see through the haze with binoculars. You could see the stars.
I'm looking at pictures right here of the red ring. Pretty crazy.
Well, what I saw when I looked up was a whitish dot up in the sky that had not been there before. So I whipped up my binoculars, and I had a tape recorder running, and I said into the tape recorder, "Yep, it's a ring." And then I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 lights in this ring. And I looked as hard as I could to see if I could see anything supporting the ring. Now, you got to understand, this haze played an important role here. Had this object been between me and the haze would have been silhouetted against the haze as a dark object blocking some of the light from the haze. So I should have been able to see something. If it had been beyond the haze, then it was quite a distance away and large. In either case, unlikely hoax. So I listened with a big ear, and I couldn't hear anything. Other people took photographs, and videos, which were all available for analysis later on. And we had also set up a attempt to do a triangulation by lining pipes on special sighting tubes on the ground. And the bottom line was, if it was between me and the haze, it was like 3,000 or 4,000 feet away. And if it was beyond the haze, which would explain why I couldn't see the lifting body, it was tens of feet in size. In other words, this was a big monster thing. If the reason that I couldn't see the support was that it was beyond the haze, and it was there for 70 seconds. It sort of, you move either upwards or it moved over us. One guy yells, "It's moving over us." You can hear him yelling on the tape that I made. So anyway, that was a sighting. I wrote about it in the Gulf Breeze newspaper, and it's on my website.
With Gulf Breeze, like I said, there were so many sightings down there by so many different people, and then I mean, with Ed and the sealed camera that was brought in, I was a little disappointed that he wasn't able to go out and shoot the 20 more shots like he did originally with the Polaroids. But I don't know if it's been proven or debunked. You know what I mean? I'm kind of on the fence about Gulf Breeze.
I'll have to send you my paper that was never published, Gulf Breeze, The Untold Story.
I would love to read it. Well, what about, somebody just tweeted about Billy Meier. Now, I don't want to open up a whole Billy Meier can of worms here because for two reasons. One, Billy Meier, those original photographs are what got me into ufology, if you know what I mean. Back then, they were the photographs were extraordinary. Today, there's been so much debunking and analysis done on his stuff that it's looking more and more completely hoaxed out. And it's not only like what you said, it's not the case of the photographs, it's what's around the case too as well. It's who's behind it and what other evidence do we have and so forth. So with Billy, it's just looking darker and darker every day. What's your take on Billy Meier today?
Well, I have avoided him as much as possible, but when his movies first came out, the one movie which shows this object swinging left and right and apparently contacting the top of a tree, anybody who's looked at Billy Meier stuff would be familiar with that film. I analyzed the motion of this object, which looks like a classic flying saucer.
Mm-hmm.
And I concluded that this was identical to something being supported by a suspending rope or string, swinging back and forth like a pendulum.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that a so-called planar, P-L-A-N-A-R, planar pendulum, where it swings back and forth left-right,
mm-hmm.
And a so-called conical pendulum, where it goes, the pendulum bob, the weight at the end of the string goes around in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
The rotation around in a circle and the swinging back and forth have the same period of time, the same oscillation rate. And so if you go from a planar pendulum to a conical, you can do that by moving the top of the string. Anybody who's played with yo-yos and stuff would know what I'm talking about, I guess.
Right.
I analyzed that and said it looks to me like it's a pendulum. Their response was, well, the Pleiadians can make their spacecraft move any way they want, including make them look like a pendulum. At the end of my article, I said, I can't say that Billy never had an experience, but I don't use his experiences as evidence for UFOs.
And we'll leave it there. Let's just leave it there. I mean, look, there's so many people out there that it's weird. It's either you're for or against. There's no gray area in the middle. And
I should point out that the paper that I wrote was published in the International UFO Reporter years ago. I forget, but it's on my website.
And I'm sure the negative email came in after that was published. A lot of it. You don't have to answer. Let's move on from Billy Meier. Let's just let that go. And let's talk about the first part of your book. Let's go. Let's start there. And I mentioned to you earlier today that the most, and it's in the book too as well, but the most looked at document on the FBI website is the when was it? 1940. When was that document? 1948, 49?
No, March 1950.
Not March 1950. It's the most viewed document on the FBI website. If you Google search FBI UFO document, it'll take you right there to the FBI vault.
And it even beats out JFK?
Yeah, and Elvis.
And Elvis, wow.
So let's start there with the FBI UFO connection.
Well, that story sort of begins with the McMinnville photos. And my investigation of the McMinnville case was not just the photos, but also the testimony of the witnesses. And part of the testimony of Mr. Trent was that he was at work when two FBI agents came and interviewed him. This was in a week or 2 weeks or something after his photos had been published in June of 1950. Well, I was in 1974, 75, when I was beginning my investigation of the Trent case. I came upon this claim by Trent that he had this visit by the FBI agents. In 1975, the Freedom of Information Act came into force, and that meant that you could write to governmental organizations and ask for information. So I thought, well, why not try it with the Trent case? Now, I should say that I didn't expect to get anything out of the FBI. The only comment about the FBI had been made by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book, in his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. That book was published in 1955, and in the book he said that the FBI was never officially interested in UFOs. So I didn't expect to get much. I hoped that they might give me some hint as to whether or not there was a file on Paul Trent. And I said, oh, by the way, if you got anything else on UFOs, please let me know. I wrote this letter in September of 1976, and 10 or so days later got a letter back from the FBI saying, your request is number 34,000 and somehow.
Exactly.
At which point I figured I might hear something in the next century. So I basically forgot about it, and then 6 months later approximately, I was working at my desk, and I get a phone call from I was a very surprised person to get a phone call from a very surprised FBI agent who said, gee, there's a bunch of stuff here on UFOs, and I'll send you, he offered to pick out what he thought was the best stuff, send it to me as a first chunk of information, and later, months and years, the rest was released, totaling about 1,600 pages of stuff. A lot of it is copies and newspaper clippings and so on, but 1,600 pages means they had some level of seriousness about the subject. Anyway.
What did he send you in that first batch?
400 and some pages.
Insane. Good stuff?
I think it was 470.
Good stuff?
Oh, yeah. It was basically the important stuff. There was other things that turned out to be interesting, too, but as far as I was concerned in terms of generating a history of the subject, the history of UFOs is largely the history of the Air Force project to investigate UFOs. But the FBI gave us a window on the Air Force investigation, a window the Air Force probably had hoped would stay closed.
40s. Let me guess, 1947 to 1952.
Yeah, that's the primary period of interest.
Right.
Well, now, this whole mess began on June 24th, 1947 with Kenneth Arnold's sighting. And Kenneth Arnold was a sufficiently credible person in his description to make people treat it as a real, genuine sighting. It wasn't a hoax. Of course, he was the first person to make a report like that, so that he couldn't call him a copycat. And he described these semicircular objects, 9 of them that were traveling in a chain, flipping and flashing in the sunlight as they went past Mount Rainier down towards Mount Adams, and he thought they must be some new development of the Air Force, the Army Air Corps at that point, and he timed the time it took him to go from Mount Rainier down to Mount Adams, and when you calculated the distance of about 50 miles and the time it took on his dashboard clock, 102 seconds, comes out about 1,700 miles an hour. Now, the speed of sound, the sound barrier is about 700 and some miles an hour at sea level. Chuck Yeager was the first person to break the sound barrier, the first person with the right stuff, you might say. And that was in October of 1947. So these objects were already going 1,000 miles an hour faster than Chuck Yeager would go 3 or 4 months later. These things have been called all sorts of stuff, and most recently being pelicans. And I'm very amused at people who try these simple identifications. Arnold claimed that he was initially flying towards Mount Rainier, roughly towards Mount Rainier, flying eastward when these things appeared and they went past to the south. He turned his airplane, rolled down his window, so he made sure there were no reflections of anything in any glass. And at that point, he was headed south, parallel to the direction of the objects. Had they been pelicans, they would have been only a couple of miles away, and he would have outrun them in no time. So they never would have appeared to go past Mount Adams. Anyway, this is typical of the skeptical explanations that are offered, any explanation in a storm. It's better to have an explanation than have no explanation at all. The Air Force was suddenly confronted with this, and they said, they're not ours, we don't know whose they were. And the next days after June 24th, other people started reporting. And by early July, there were probably dozens of sighting reports, mostly from the far west of the United States, but some from other countries and other states as well. Investigators in the 1980s and 90s, going back and looking at the early flap in 1947, found hundreds, maybe several thousand reports in papers scattered throughout the United States over the period of time from June through August of 1947. Well, I'm not going to speak about Roswell because requires a whole other story. And what I will speak about is sufficiently self-contained. The Air Force had at Muroc Air Force Base, at Edwards Air Force Base, sightings by Air Force officers, several sightings in one day, at which point, according to Ruppelt, the Air Force took a serious interest in the subject. It was one thing to have civilian pilots and civilian ground observers reporting oddball stuff.
That's right.
It's quite another thing to have their own Air Force people who supposedly know what's up in the sky report the same thing. So on the 9th of July, General George A. Shulgin, who was general in charge of intelligence requirements branch for intelligence collection, contacted the FBI and asked if the FBI would help and investigate. The Air Force was particularly interested in whether the possibility of subversion going on, communist sympathizers generating spurious UFO stories. It wasn't called UFOs then, flying saucers. Spurious flying saucer sightings in order to convince the American people that the Soviets had some capability that the United States didn't in the Air Force. Our Air Force could not control the skies. Well, I guess probably Shulgin also knew that the Air Force wasn't necessarily good at investigating with respect to weird phenomena, so they tried to pass it off on the FBI. But in any case, there is a document in the FBI file, which was the document summarizing what Shulgin told the Air Force, namely that they're using all their scientists to run down these sightings and see if they could figure out what was going on. And they promised the FBI that they would share information with them if the FBI would actually interview witnesses. So the FBI, there's a document in which DM Ladd, who was one of the top assistants of Hoover, recommended they not do it because a lot of the sightings had been hoaxes. And then Clyde Tolson, who was Hoover's good friend, his very good friend. As a matter of fact, Clyde Tolson was his very, very, very good friend, recommended that they do it. And then Hoover says, I would do it, and this is written out on a piece of paper that is in the FBI file. I would do it, but we must first insist upon full access to all disks recovered. For example, in the L.A., Louisiana case, the Army grabbed it before we had a chance to give it a cursory examination. So, bottom line is the FBI issued a directive to their special agents all over the United States to, if somebody brings a UFO sighting to them, or they should go out and interview witnesses if they hear about a UFO sighting, and send the results to the headquarters FBI and to the Air Force. And so the FBI was officially in it for a period of time. Meantime, the Air Force is doing its own investigation. A document found in the FBI file that is not found in the Air Force file. There's no date on it and no name of the person who wrote it, but we can make a guess. It was near the end of July, and it says, for lack of acknowledging the sightings, it says lack of pressure from the top side to figure out what these things are suggests that there's something going on at the top people know about. Well, of course, that's an interesting statement probably written by a guy who was a colonel in the Air Force. That there's a lack of pressure as compared to other previous situations, like the so-called ghost rockets in Sweden of the year before.
That's right.
Anyway, that same document gives a characterization of flying saucers based on an analysis of 24 of the best sightings at that point. The Air Force only used 24 sightings, although there were probably hundreds of sighting reports in newspapers. And they talked about this phenomenon is real and not visionary or fictitious. Something is really flying around, disc-shaped, able to appear suddenly and disappear quickly, and has dynamical capabilities beyond what we have. Bottom line is that they already had fundamental characteristics of flying saucers that separate them from ordinary aircraft or mundane things seen in the sky. So the FBI was investigating and did investigate witnesses, and meanwhile the Air Force was also doing investigation. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations talked to a number of witnesses, and by the late fall, in September of 1947, the Air Materiel Command at Wright Field had written up a report passed to Nathan Twining, who was Nathan Twining was the head of the AMC at the time, and he wrote up a report echoing this document that was found in the FBI file about things being real and not visionary or fictitious. And he recommended setting up a project to study this situation. That project was ultimately set up as Project Sign beginning in January of 1948. And they worked on sightings. They had a couple hundred sightings by the summer of 48 that they had analyzed. And then a big one came along, a so-called child's witted sighting of a torpedo-shaped object that went zipping past a passenger airliner. It was seen by the people on the airliner and seen by the crew on the airliner, the air crew. And apparently a couple of another airplane witness and a ground witness as well. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. The top Air Force brass said, we want an opinion of what's going on.
Did they ever mention E.T.? You know, they always say...
Well, I'm getting to that right now.
Okay.
Now, there were two groups of intelligence people working on the same project, on the same problem. what I called AFI in the book, is Air Force Intelligence headquartered at the Pentagon. Then there was the technical intelligence people at Wright Field, the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, what later became, as part of the Air Materiel Command, the technical people called T2 and T3, later became the Air Technical Intelligence Center, which is what it was known by during the years of Project Blue Book. So anyway, these two groups were working on the same data set, that is reports, but basically independently working on the same reports. The Air Force Intelligence, I think, was written after the one done at Air Materiel Command. The one at Air Materiel Command at Wright Field is the legendary estimate of the situation, called legendary because it was destroyed in the years afterwards. Not too long after, but not immediately afterwards, because Ruppelt claimed he had a chance to read it. And in this estimate of the situation, it was passed as a paper up through the chain of command all the way to General Vandenberg, four-star Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Vandenberg rejected it. The story goes, according to Ruppelt, that a bunch of guys, or several people from Air Materiel Command at Wright Field went to the Pentagon to argue their case for extra interplanetary. That was their conclusion. That the only thing that made any sense, when you take into account all the credibility of the witnesses and so on, the only thing that made any sense was that there was interplanetary vehicles flying around. And Vandenberg rejected that even after they went there and talked to them. Now, Vandenberg is rejecting the opinion of his experts. And in a sense, Vandenberg had hired these people to work for him. They were experts in analyzing flight characteristics of foreign aircraft and how to determine how advanced these foreign aircraft were, foreign being primarily Soviet aircraft. Point is that these guys knew what was in the skies, and they knew how to analyze stuff. They were the experts, and yet the general tells them, sorry, wrong answer. Go back and get another answer. So that put a damper on the whole thing. The Air Force intelligence people at the Pentagon also wrote up a report in which they tried to argue, well, first of all, they said they agreed with the Air Materiel Command report that these things are visionary and are real and not visionary or fictitious, and they have a whole bunch of characteristics. You can read about all this in the book. But they tried to argue that maybe barely they could argue that it was Soviet craft flying over, and we should therefore study them, study what's going on, and find out if there really is a threat to the United States. And that's ultimately what came about. This project called Project Sign was set up to study the sightings. Now, the FBI investigated witnesses during the July and August, some in September. But then there was a sort of a scandal. One of the Air Force people told an FBI person that the Air Force that the FBI had been brought in to handle all the case of ash can covers and toilet seats, namely the hoax cases. And when the FBI agent heard this from an Air Force guy, he sent a message to Hoover saying, "This sounds like scandalous at the very least. I don't think we should be involved." So Hoover wrote to one of the top generals that he was getting his people out of this investigation business because they were not going to be handling the cases of ash can covers and toilet seats. Hoover parroted the same expression to prove that he had penetrated the Air Force secrecy, I guess. Anyway, official investigation by the FBI ended, but the FBI was like a black hole, and it stored up information. I was told by an FBI agent that headquarters FBI, by direction of Congress, could never destroy anything. Local offices had a 5 or 10 year rule that if after 5 to 10 years some file had become moribund, it wasn't active, they could dump it. But anything that went to headquarters had to stay there forever. So for that reason, we got documents out of the FBI which tell us what the Air Force was doing. Whether the Air Force wanted us to know or not is almost irrelevant. They wanted the FBI to know, and never thought that the FBI would release the stuff to the American people. Well, this is a very long and involved story about the intertwining of the FBI and the Air Force. But two key events are this rejection of the interplanetary or ET explanation by General Vandenberg set a policy that ET was not an acceptable explanation for sightings. That forced the investigators, the people doing the studies, to analyze these sightings from the point of view of it's not ET. It must be either our secret craft, Soviet secret craft, misidentifications of known phenomena, mostly natural phenomena, hoaxes or delusions. And they couldn't believe that, they checked to find out if any of our secret projects could create flying saucer reports and decided that was impossible. Then they rejected the Soviet hypothesis because they couldn't believe the Soviets would fly their secret craft over the United States, just as we would not fly our secret craft over the Soviet Union, because something might break or get shot down, and then the secret wouldn't be a secret anymore.
That's right.
Nevertheless, there was a repeated appeal to the Soviet threat.
Well, what was the FBI? That was the Air Force's official position. How was the FBI treating? What was their official position? Because it was separate from the Air Force.
Yeah, the FBI never stated a separate position. But let me just finish what I was going to try.
Okay.
Say. You could say that Vandenberg's rejection of the ET explanation, interplanetary explanation, was building the coffin for the interplanetary explanation.
That's right.
5 years later, General Samford, at a press conference, nailed the nails into the lid of the coffin. And after that, there was never any mention of the possibility of interplanetary. But a lot of things happened in those first 5 years, and the FBI picked up on a lot of stuff. The green fireball phenomenon was a major event, or series of events, starting in December of 1948. These green fireball, they're called fireballs, but an expert meteoricist, Lincoln La Paz, says they're not normal meteors because they were concentrated in the southwest area of the United States. And the first ones that were seen all seemed to come from the north heading towards the south, as if they'd come over the pole. And the FBI got involved with the green fireball stuff because the FBI was responsible for the protection of vital installations. And the vital installations happened to be where the fireballs were sighted. Los Alamos, New Mexico, where atomic bombs were designed.
Mm-hmm.
Sandia Base, where atomic bombs were built. That was right next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, the so-called Killeen Base near Fort Hood, Texas, where they stored the atomic bombs. Now, we didn't have a lot of atomic bombs back in those days. It took a while to make each one. But we had to, Truman realized we had to have a storage, have a certain number of them to make a credible threat to the Soviet Union, that if they started a war, we might drop 3 or 4 or 5 bombs. Well, in December of 1948, the security patrols around these installations, in particular around Los Alamos and Albuquerque, began to see green lights going through the sky, green like a stoplight green, a go light green, I should say. And these would travel along as a horizontal trajectory until it suddenly drop off and then disappear. And a meteoricist, this guy Lincoln La Paz, was told about them. He said there hardly any pure green meteors, but he saw one himself and decided that they weren't real. The FBI was told by an Air Force officer who was in charge of the nuclear energy for propulsion of aircraft project that he thought these things were, flying saucers were Soviet missiles. And he was interviewed by the FBI, and in this interview gave the FBI the impression that best evidence at the Air Material Command was some films had been shot by aircraft traveling along, following one of these things. And so the FBI was being told that some Soviet missiles were traveling over the United States, on the one hand, and they were also involved in protecting of vital installations, so they were in meetings where the security details of these various installations talked about the green fireballs. Green fireball sightings continued through 1949 and into 1950. Nobody ever figured out what they were, but they did cause a lot of consternation to the people protecting the installations. And the FBI learned about these sightings because of it. There are things in my book, though, that do not have to do with the FBI, but nevertheless, sightings which don't have anything to do with the FBI, but are important to know because you have to understand how the Air Force was blowing hot and cold on the subject.
Right.
The FBI would be told, well, there's nothing to it. Like in the end of 1949, the Air Force publicly announced it was closing down what was then called Project Grudge. It had been Project Sign for a year, and its name was changed to Project Grudge. And the whole world was told that there was nothing to flying saucers, and the Air Force was closing down Project Grudge. A month later, the FBI gets a whole bunch of, a document, which is essentially a sighting report from the Air Force saying, please tell us everything you know about flying saucers. That happened several different times where the public announcements would be that there's nothing to it, and then the FBI would get a sighting, what you might call a sighting form, saying this is what we want to know if anybody brings you any information on flying saucers. So publicly, the Air Force was disparaging the subject. Privately, they were still interested in working on it.
Did Hoover ever was Hoover ever given proof of the truth about UFOs?
Well, I guess you could say indirectly he was in 1952.
Right.
But let me mention this March 8th document. They're referring to three crash saucers and bodies and so on. It says, an investigator for the Air Force has reported to a special agent in charge, an FBI officer, all about the crash discs. There is question as to whether this is a so-called Aztec crash or something else, or if it's all just made up by Silas Newton, who was a con man and oil prospector. But as far as the FBI is concerned, the importance of this document is that it got Hoover to. The Air Force had blown hot and cold on the subject so much. He asked directly one of his agents to go and ask the Air Force, really, what do you think of this flying saucer stuff? In other words, they had gotten this document about crashed flying saucers after being told that Project Grudge had closed, and the Air Force had explained everything. So you have to imagine, what's a poor FBI agent to think when the Air Force is publicly saying there's nothing to it and privately asking for more information.
Right.
So Hoover, what we have in the FBI file is a document saying, responding to Hoover's request for what does the Air Force really think of this. And so an FBI agent went to the Pentagon and talked to two Air Force colonels and was told that the project had closed and that 80% of everything or whatever, some percentage, was explainable as a normal phenomena seen under unusual circumstances, maybe. And their feeling was that everything could be explained, basically. So Hoover was given the impression that there was nothing to it in March of 1950. But, of course, things continued, including the fireballs. And then we get into a project known as Twinkle. But that was to record on film. Project Twinkle was to record on film flying saucers flying over the New Mexico areas where they were doing classified research. And the Air Force, the FBI knew about this stuff because the part of the research was carried out at these so-called vital installations. and the FBI learned that Project Twinkle was successful, but it was covered up. That's a big line. That's a nice, interesting story that's told in the in the book.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the October 9th document, right, 1950, and I mean, no matter how somebody wants to read into this and say that this was handed down, this is rumor and or urban legend that had been word of mouth all the way through to this FBI agent here who wrote the memo. What's his name? D.M. Ladd, right? And this is to the director, but I mean, it clearly states that that alien bodies were retrieved and that the disc were recovered, and it mentions Project Twinkle in here as well. Now, if these stories were going around between agencies, the military and the FBI, was the CIA even created back then? Yeah, it was by this point. It was. So these guys were sharing the same stories, but it motivated the Agent Ladd enough to write the document to Hoover. It says to the director.
Right.
I mean,
that's where he talked to Boggs and the other guy.
Yeah. Boggs and Sanders. I'm reading. Well, anyway. I think it's a very important document, and I had read a couple of analysis from the FBI on this, saying, well, it was just rumor that was going around like the telephone game, and by the time it got to this agent, it was. It wasn't. Now there was bodies recovered when before there was no stories about this at all. But I think it's an important document, and it is the most viewed document on the FBI website.
Yeah, well, like I said, the important thing about the document, from my point of view, is it caused Hoover to make a direct request to the Air Force for an opinion on the subject, and Boggs and Hearns.
Yeah, Hearns, yes.
Gave him that opinion. They had closed Project Grudge because everything could be explained, and they weren't interested in the subject anymore. Then, not within a few months, of course, because of this Project Twinkle aspect and the green fireball stuff, the FBI was told that the Air Force was still investigating after all.
Why would the CIA investigate UFOs, and why would because
CIA?
Because the CIA is outside of the United States. Is that the reason why their concern would be there? I mean, why would...
First of all, the CIA had no more than a passing interest in the subject. We were barely following it from 1947 all the way up into 1952.
Right.
In 1952, there was a huge flap of sightings, which... before we get to that, I'd like to mention one other thing that I found in the FBI file. It leads to an interesting actual historical conundrum or question mark, and that's the document I found in the FBI file that talks about the counterintelligence corps, the Army counterintelligence corps, being put on immediate high alert. You look in the chapter on immediate high alert for any information related to flying saucers. That was a teletype message in the FBI file on December 8th of 1950. Now, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Counterintelligence Corps. I sent them a copy of the document. I said, can you find this and can you find anything else on it? And they couldn't find anything. So here's a situation where the FBI is the only source for what amounts to a very important document. Why is it important? Well, the Counterintelligence Corps doesn't go running around looking for will-o'-the-wisps all the time. There must have been some solidity to the idea that the flying saucers were real in order for the Counterintelligence Corps to ask for any information on that. But why would they? Is there anything about this particular date that is significant? And the answer is yes. 2 days earlier, on December 6, 1950, it is known history that the U.S. went on an auto alert status as a result of 40 objects. Well, it wasn't known that there were 40 objects until we found a document. But it's known from the writings of Dean Acheson and Harry Truman that the United States went on alert. They were told, or they were told it was because of atmospheric conditions in the north, or flights of geese. There was a newspaper story about the alert, going on alert because of a single C-47 aircraft flying somewhere near northern Maine. But in investigating this particular guaranteed historical event, I mean, guaranteed, there's no question that this happened. I and another guy, Don Berliner, were going through documents that had recently been released, and he just happened to come upon this one document that is the only technical information available on this event, which was that radar picked up targets, I estimate 100 to 200 miles away from Presqu'île, Maine. This is the northern upper, if you look at a map of the United States, we're talking about the upper right-hand corner.
Mm-hmm.
And these objects were detected on radar traveling in a southwestern direction. It would take them right over the capital of the United States. And they were picked up on radar, and immediately CONAC, Continental Air Command, went on a high alert and scrambled jets because they were detecting these objects, and the objects were not responding. You can imagine the objects were not responding to interrogate friend or foe IFF signal, and there had been no flight plan filed, so they were unknowns. And the first natural reaction was these were Soviet bombers coming to start off the Third World War.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm able to put together in the book a story of what happened. These 40 objects went over Maine, and to use the terminology, the track faded out. Nobody knows what they were. But 2 days later, the Counterintelligence Corps was put on immediate high alert for any information related to flying saucers. My guess is that those objects that were flying much faster, twice as fast as a Soviet bomber could travel, were in fact some flying saucers. Now, that's a history you get out of my book and nowhere else.
Right. I see. We almost let this get by today. We were talking about Major General Samford earlier, and just real quick, tell the story about you in the restaurant, and I'll let you tell who was sitting in the restaurant overhearing your conversation.
Yes, well, I used to live in Silver Spring, Maryland, in the Four Corners area. It's called the Four Corners area, and I was entertaining a young lady, young compared to now, anyway, at a restaurant, and she was interested in the UFO stuff, so we were talking UFOs. And this couple sits down at the table next to us, and I noticed the guy sort of be paying a little bit of attention to what I was talking to her about. By this time, I had already investigated a number of sightings. This was late 70s. I don't remember exactly the time, 78, 79, 80, somewhere around in there. And suddenly the guy breaks into the conversation and said he was very interested in what we were talking about and so on. And it turned out that he was the son of John Samford, who held a press conference on July 29th of 1952, in which he said everything was, as far as he was concerned, everything was natural phenomena. All these sightings, literally hundreds of sightings that had happened over the previous couple of weeks. So anyway, John Samford's son, I asked him, of course I was interested to know whether Samford had ever talked to his family about these sightings. And his son said he had tried to get his father to talk, but his father wouldn't say anything.
That is fascinating to me. And, I always say it, silence is worse than lying or telling the truth.
But now let me tell the story about this Samford situation. First of all, you have to understand, and this is shown clearly in the book, that the sighting rate built up in the summer. 1952 could be called the year of the UFO. There were the Air Force claimed 1,500 objects, 2,000 some reports, some sometimes more than one report of a single object. Over 2,000 reports in this 1 year. And the sighting rate peaked in July of 1947, and that was also the time when sightings occurred over in forbidden areas around the White House and the Capitol. Targets were picked up on National Airport radar and Air Force radar, I think at Andrews Air Force Base at the same time. And there were visual sightings as well as the radar sightings, including at least one jet chase, where the jet and the object were both picked up on radar, and the thing zipped away, and the radar and the jet pilot remarked the extreme rate of speed of the object. So anyway, there had been hundreds of sightings. You get the book and you can see some of the maybe a dozen newspaper clippings that give you a hint of an idea of. One big headline was hundreds of people see flying saucers in, I think it was Michigan, but wherever it was. Anyway, on July 26th, they had 50-some reports. And July 19th, 20th is one weekend, and July 26th, 27th, 25, 26th was the next weekend. These 2 weekends, there were sightings over Washington, D.C. It was in the middle of the week that the Air Force ordered jets to try to shoot down something. General Samford had ordered a briefing paper, you might call it, to be written so that he could brief another general and General White on the flying saucer situation. Turns out that he didn't end up giving the briefing to General White. He ended up giving it, part of it, to the assembled press. He was directed to hold a press conference and essentially handle the situation. The press being climbing all over the Air Force because of all these sightings throughout the country and in other countries. So Samford opened this press conference at 4 o'clock on July 29th, 1952. And during that press conference, it lasted an hour and a half or something like that, a long press conference. He didn't have any witnesses. He just had some people who could make comments, including General Ramey, who was the guy who squashed the Roswell case, by the way.
Right.
And they got up in front of the audience. Samford had an opening statement in which he said we've received between 1,000 and 2,000 sightings, and we've analyzed a bunch of them. We have explained most of them to our satisfaction, but there are some sightings by credible people of incredible things, and we're still working on those, but we expect to be able to explain them too. And basically he was saying we expect to be able to explain everything, and nothing to worry about. People asked about the radar detections over Washington, D.C., and he said he speculated that it was due to a weather phenomenon known as a temperature inversion that causes radar rays to bend downwards and hit the ground instead of going up into the air. So anyway, the next day the press went away with a published story saying that UFOs are hot air and stuff like that, basically poo-pooing the whole subject. If Vandenberg had created the coffin for interplanetary back in 1948, September 48, when he rejected the estimate of the situation, then Samford put the final nails in the coffin when he said everything, as far as he was concerned, was natural phenomena at this press conference, and the press went away all happy that everything was hunky-dory. Well, guess what? The FBI knew it wasn't that way. The FBI sent a liaison guy by the name of Reynolds to Air Force Intelligence in the Pentagon to find out what was really going on with all these flying saucer sightings. And there's a document in the FBI file which summarizes what the FBI agent was told. And I don't have time to go into it in depth, but basically the FBI was told there was 2 to 3% of the sightings that could not be explained, and I underline could not be explained. This is to differentiate the ones from, well, maybe it's explainable, but maybe with a little bit more information we could explain things. These were ones that could not be explained. And the guy that the FBI document says that because of these unexplained ones, top-level people some of them are seriously considering interplanetary craft. I forget the exact wording, but you can look it up. The point is, interplanetary craft was under consideration as far as Air Force intelligence was concerned, but that was private, that was classified information. And had General Samford said, oh yeah, we're also considering the interplanetary possibility at the press conference, it could have blown the lid off the cover-up right there.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the most important press conferences ever as far as ufology goes.
The second, that wasn't a fluke. The fact that they were told there were 2 to 3% unexplained, and some people were considering interplanetary, was not a fluke. There was another document in the FBI file in October of 1952, which reiterated the interplanetary explanation. And even the CIA, although the CIA investigated the Project Blue Book to find out if Project Blue Book was doing a good job, and decided Project Blue Book wasn't doing a good job, CIA decided on their own that there was something worth investigating, and would have set up their own investigation if it hadn't been squashed by the so-called Robertson panel that occurred in late January of 1953. The Robertson panel was supposed to answer the question, is there really anything to flying saucers? And if there is, the CIA was going to recommend that the intelligence organizations in the United States set up a special project to investigate. And it's clear from the way he has written that Marshall Chadwell, chief scientist of the CIA, was convinced that there was something going on. As a matter of fact, the cover of my book says, has a little blurb from the CIA, something going on demands immediate attention.
I just posted links to the book. The book is called The FBI CIA UFO Connection. The links are up directly on Twitter now and have been retweeted already. They're out there. Listen, Dr. Maccabee, we're out of time, but I have two other questions. Two other things that I need to please indulge me, okay? And let's just get to it really quick
I'll
before
stay up
we
all
go.
night if you want.
Yeah, well, hey, you know what? I'll let the network know. Is this? I have two general questions. First one, MJ12 documents as a whole, yay or nay?
Well, there's a bunch of them that I'm convinced are hoaxes. The question is, are there any that are real? And I think there's a good possibility that some of them are. One of them, I mention them in the book, but I do not go into them in any depth. There is one document, though, that I would claim is definitely real, and that's the Cutler Twining memo.
Me too. I'm with you.
I've held that in my grubby little hands.
Did you?
Huh? Yes. There's an article about it on the website.
Okay.
It's a very interesting piece of paper. It's got creases across it indicating it was folded into a trifold pattern at one time, but it had been sitting under pressure long enough to flatten out the creases. And around the edges is browning, which tells me that this document sat in a pile of documents for years. Anyway, the MJ12 documents play a peripheral role in what I've written about in the book, because the CIA got interested in trying to find out whether they were real or not also. And I'll leave it up to the reader to find out the answer.
Okay. Now, Black Knight satellite. Our great audience has been tweeting pictures all night of the Red Skylab 3, right? UFO, and pictures of the Black Knight satellite. And I can see where they are connecting the dots here, so to speak. They do look similar. Have you ever considered that? Have you ever looked at the images of the Black Knight satellite and maybe gone back to Skylab to see if possibly they were the same objects?
Well, no, I'm not sure what the Black the Black Knight satellite looks like. Is it painted red?
Well, no. Well, the pictures that NASA had up. Okay, so if you haven't seen the original photographs, I will send those to you, and I'll let you take a look at them.
Okay.
The original Black Knight satellite photographs that NASA had up on their own website, they pulled those down. Now, the Black Knight satellites reported to be, 12,000 years old, 10,000 years old, 15,000. It was in a polar orbit.
12,000 years old. What do you mean?
Well, I'll send you. We don't have enough time to get into it right now.
If it's 12,000 years old, it's not a NASA satellite.
Yeah, no, it's not. And you have to see the photographs of it that NASA had up. Now, they've been pulled down. But I'll send you the original NASA satellite pictures. Now, it looks like the Black Knight satellite. It's an irregular shape, first off. It doesn't look man-made in that it looks it's an irregular shape. I don't know how to explain it. It's like a long Z. It's black. It's large. It's huge. And like I said, it was in a polar orbit as opposed to an orbit that would go around the equator. It went the opposite direction, which we didn't have the technology when the Black Knight satellite was first detected. And, it went through a detection period in the early 1900s, redetected again in the 1920s, and then in the 1950s, and it was detected in a polar orbit. We didn't have that technology then. Back then, Sputnik and the only few satellites that we had up, and Telstar and everything else was going through another orbit. But anyway, so NASA had a bunch of pictures up on their website of this object, and they have been pulled down. But I'm looking here.
Well, if you tell me it's in a polar orbit, that automatically rejects. Because this thing was seen for many minutes. It had to be traveling nearly parallel to the Skylab. Anything in a polar orbit, I don't know what altitude you're talking about, but they're traveling like 17,000 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It would have gone zipping by the Skylab, and if seen at all, it would have been briefly because of its extreme speed.
Right.
The Skylab satellite is going on an orbit which is roughly equatorial.
Right.
With a tilt to it.
Well, I'm looking.
And anything in a polar orbit would have to be going in the right direction. It would be running almost perpendicular to the orbit of the Skylab. And at 17,000 miles an hour, 5 miles a second, in a few seconds it would have been out of sight.
Yeah.
And if you say it's black, it probably would have been picked up anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to send you the pictures. That I can see why somebody would think that they were the same object. It's kind of strange.
I don't know how big it was supposedly, but we calculated an estimated size of the red thing as being a couple hundred feet.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger than the Skylab itself.
And again, the red object with Skylab 3 is, again, it doesn't look man-made. That's a kooky shape. I don't know how to explain it, but it doesn't look like anything you can relate to. It doesn't look like anything that we've manufactured.
That's right.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. I got to thank you for coming on the show tonight. And the one thing I wanted to talk about Hawk. So at a future date, let's get you back on the show. And can we talk about Hawk?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Maccabee. Anything you want to leave us with? Are you speaking anytime soon? Are you doing any symposiums?
We'll be speaking at a local Lima, Ohio area UFO Research Association meeting on Wednesday.
Oh, that's great. I just came from Ohio.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just there. I just got back yesterday. Mm-hmm. So you're doing that on Wednesday, and what else?
Well, nothing else lined up except some radio interviews farther on.
Okay. I want to thank you. Such an honor to get you on the show, and next time, I promise, I'm going to take you right out of the box. We're going to go somewhere else. Is that a deal?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bruce Maccabee. Say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Oh, good. Good night, Dr. Maccabee. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night. Bruce Maccabee. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I was tempted to request some extra airtime, but again, he's in Baltimore, and it's very, very late out there. It's now, it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to take 2 seconds. I'll be back, and I will take one phone call. And I was watching the phone calls come in, but look, with Dr. Maccabee, I needed all my time. We were going to squeeze some other stuff in, so I needed it all. Everybody say goodnight to Bruce. I'm watching it. Thank you. Yeah, Gene just said Dino. You think? I'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
This is William from La Crescenta, and I listen to JimmyChurchRadio.com. Jimmy Church. My name is Alan, and I listen to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
He's always giving it to you straight.
JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris. What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio, The Revolution.
Yeah. Fade to black. All right. I said one phone call. Here we go. Are we ready? Let's do it. Hi, you're live on Fade to Black. Who's calling? Where are you calling from?
This is Rick calling from Henderson, Nevada.
Henderson, Nevada. There's no such place, Rick. How are you tonight?
Actually, there is.
Hey, was that
doing pretty good?
Was that an extraordinary conversation or what?
I loved it. And thank you for asking my question about the Polaroids, because that's always something that I thought gave a little more validity, because especially with the Instamatic cameras, they're harder to fake. And I've seen people do their damnedest to make, fake, usually they try to do fake ghost photographs. And every time they try to do a fake UFO photograph, it's abysmal.
Yeah, and you heard his reaction to that. And he's firmly in that corner. One of the things, and see, Gulf Breeze, and I have to, one of the things when it comes to an expert like Bruce Maccabee, who all of it, I mean, that's it. He's the guy in all of ufology. He's the guy that we look up to when it comes to photo analysis, period. That's it.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody else is, I just, like I told him, I just don't even listen to those guys that, but Bruce is that guy. So when he says something, you have to stop and listen. And when it comes to Gulf Breeze, Ed Walters and I'm uneasy with Ed Walters. But Bruce, we have to take at face value. And when he said they took the Polaroid out of his hands and gave him a sealed camera, you should go read the story. It's absolutely incredible. They pulled.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah. And they pulled Ed out of his element, man. They gave him a sealed camera, lied to him about it, and said it could do, other things, just trying to make sure that he was on his toes. But he did produce that famous photograph with the two objects in it in the background. And when you go, you can see it online and go look at Ed Walters and see how Bruce was, Bruce wanted to make sure that, Bruce's reputation was on the line too. And the one thing that I didn't do tonight, and I didn't want to, because I hold Bruce way, way up high. I'm not here to embarrass him or put him in a weird position. But I know that, from his own words, he felt for a while that he was duped. And Ed Walters was using Bruce as his crutch. Hey, man, Maccabee says it's real, so it's real. And I wanted to know how he felt about that. Was he uncomfortable with that? But, you heard me ask him direct. how do you feel today? And he says, well, you know what? I still want to believe.
Oh, yeah. And, a lot of the things that he brings up is there are things that I've showed other people in how to identify something that's just completely bunk. Is there blur? Is there too much blur? Is there not enough blur? Yeah, he raised a great point, and I think, unfortunately, in a way, him bringing that up might make people a little bit better at hoaxing.
Well, I thought the same thing. I'm like, dude, you're sitting here, you're telling everybody right now how to go and get it done. I swear that went through my mind. Oh,
but
man.
in some ways, there's just a certain finesse that it just they still won't get it. I mean, I've seen, anybody who's seen a Michael Bay movie will know that when you have CGI moving quickly, it still doesn't match up.
How did you like it when I said, so when you look at a photograph, what's your, do you ever go off your gut? Do you ever go off instinct? He shot me down. Nope.
Yeah, you got to be completely skeptical with it because, I think everybody, yourself, all the listeners, everybody has had a photograph they thought, oh man, I so want this to be real. But you can't.
You can't.
You just can't do it.
And like he said, he shot down, the Chile stuff and the Mexican UFO stuff, which I see, it kills me. I'm talking about the FLIR videos. When I see those in other documentaries and stuff, as it's still real. When I look at those,
do you mean the FLIR where they said that it was a group of planes that were looking for a drug cartel boat?
Yep. You can
that was debunked because I missed that debunking.
He debunked it, but you can tell it's something on the ground. So oh man, hey Rick, thank you, man. I'm gonna run credits. Everything
cool.
good?
Just a real quick one.
Sure.
I wanted to blow you out. I know why you love David Lee Roth. You guys have the same birthday.
I didn't want to say that. That's kind of weird, huh? How about Hagar being 3 days after Van Halen's two singers?
7 years and 3 days.
Yeah, 7
He's
years.
67 today.
Yep, 67 years old. Still looks good too.
Better shape than I am.
Thank you, Rick. Hey, brother, you have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
You too, man. Take it easy.
All the best.
Bye.
Oops. Why do I do that every time? I still do it. You got to love it. All right. Another night. You got I want to say thank you for everybody coming in tonight. And thank you to Dr. Bruce Maccabee hanging in there to the wee hours of the morning in Baltimore. Special thanks to Keith Rowland and Art Bell. Rick in Vegas calling in. Faded Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Shows produced by Hilton J. Paul, Mark D. Kovar. And, special help from Les Johnson III. Fady by Dale Romero. Graphics by Method of Signaling. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Music, this guy right here, Doug Aldrich. Intro is by Space Boy. Faded Black is produced by KJCR for the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Oh, we got a good show. Butch will be here. I'll talk to everybody. Behave. Good night. See ya.